This is Spirit Gym. Paul welcomes back Russell Sturgess, who is a global thought leader in Western mindfulness. From his teens, Russell demonstrated an understanding of agape, or unconditional love, that defied his age. His upbringing saw him channel his passion into complementary health as well as religion. Russell now serves as a spiritual director, using the path of the Beatitudes as a way to help people sustainably remember to be kind to themselves, to others, and to the planet. Thank you for listening to this podcast, which would not be possible without you, our subscribers, and also our premier sponsors, Organifi, Bioptimizers, Paleo Valley, and Wild Pastures. The sponsors' special offers and discounts are mentioned throughout this episode, or you can visit the show notes page at paulchek.com/podcast. Russell also has a graphic to accompany this episode, which you can download from the show notes page.
Well, hello, everybody. As you heard from Penny's introduction, Russell Sturgess is back. You may remember my first podcast with Russell based on his book, The Spiritual Roots of the Tarot, the Cathar Code Hidden in the Cards, which I must say is one of my all-time favorite tarot books I've ever studied, and I did study it very thoroughly. One day when I meet Russell in person, I'll show it to him, and it'll be a question as to whether there's more black ink or red and yellow and highlights in my notes. But today we're going to have an amazing dialogue, and we're going to look at, as the title of our podcast is today, Tarot for Progressive Enlightenment. We're going to look at the tarot major arcana, which are the major archetypes of the tarot, as really a story about the human evolution into enlightenment. And I think that's going to be very interesting because there is a lot to that. I've studied it extensively, and I've been giving a series of lessons on the major arcana to my Spirit Gym practitioners, which they're finding quite informative. And I think there's a lot to that. There's much I could say, but I don't want to delay our adventures here because we've got a lot to get into. So welcome back, Russell. It's great to see you.
Thank you. It's always a pleasure to communicate, particularly with somebody who has such passion for my book.
Yeah.
I appreciate the respect and the interest that you have in my writing.
It's great.
And this work. So I'm looking forward to our conversation today.
Well, Russell, it's been a while since we did our first podcast together. So why don't you share with us all what you've been up to since then?
Well, it's been interesting. When we last spoke, I just moved to my new residence, and I'm living in a rainforest, 1,100 meters above sea level, and I'm literally right in the middle of the rainforest. I'm off-grid, and literally the last 2 years has been a modern hesychasm.
What's that word mean?
Well, hesychasm is about it's about a solitary life, and it was about living a life in stillness and in silence and quietness, and
Hermit.
literally, that's what's been happening for me for the last 2 years. I live in you come down a little dirt road. There's about 2 kilometres from where I live is a little village, and it's quite active. It's a very active holiday community. But where I am, I mightn't see another human being for a week, 2 weeks.
Perfect.
Sometimes. And so it's been the last 2 years has been a lifestyle of stillness and reflection and being in nature. One of the things I've done is I've created a beautiful little outdoor space where I just sit most mornings for an hour, maybe an hour and a half, and I just listen to birds.
Yeah, that's great.
I don't read. I don't research anything. I just sit in nature. And so for me, the last 2 years has been, as I said, the hesychasm was a mystic tradition of the Eastern Orthodox Christian church, the Greek Orthodox, and not that I was, because I wasn't praying like they used to in those things, but yeah, living a life in stillness, and it's been an interesting exercise.
That's perfect. Well, Rumi speaks in his poetry about the language of the birds, so maybe there's something evolving inside of you to be able to understand that language.
Well, the birds, it takes a while, but they'll come and sit on the chairs beside me now, and they'll have a bit of a chat with me, and they're not afraid of me. It's really lovely to sort of, they're getting used to who I am, and it's a very lovely experience to have that sort of level of intimacy with nature.
I think if people in general had more connection like that, they would be more conscious of what humanity at large is doing to nature in a destructive way.
Yeah, and and in the very early traditions, silence, be still and know that I am God. That whole opportunity for stillness and silence was fundamental to that spiritual journey, and a big part of my being here is about being true to and honouring what I think are the important values, and creating a lifestyle around
Yeah, I
that.
agree totally. I work with patients all the time on identifying what I call a sacred ritual, and that's, what is it that needs to be in place in your life so that you don't lose yourself in the process of, trying to make money and do this and do that, because you can end up spending all the money you make on healing illnesses and diseases if you're not careful. Then your life is just, running from one fearful event to the next. But by getting meal times and exercise and introspection time and movement time into your schedule and making that sacred, then for sure you have time to live every day, and then you have more of yourself to take into your work, and your creativity's more alive. So I think a lot of people have just gotten so caught up in the corporate mill of life that they've forgotten how to live, and lost touch with their inner nature.
Yeah, and interestingly enough, the etymology of the words health and disease are quite interesting, because disease, being not an ease, comes from the root adjacens, which means to be next to or beside. So disease literally is about being not next to or beside, and the word health, it shares its roots with the words whole and holy, and so separation in the perspective of disease and that place of oneness in the perspective of health are absolutely once again fundamental and a significant part of even though I'm living isolated by virtue of the amount of community I'm exposed to, my oneness is with nature, and it's a very, very beautiful and profound experience. That being said, I do have a partner. We don't live together. She lives 3 hours away from me, but we come together once a month and have our time together, and there's still a lot of love in my life, but there's so many other dimensions of it in terms of how I experience my world.
Well, that's good. Today, we're going to hold a dialogue on the 22 major arcana of the tarot as a path to enlightenment. But to begin our journey, I thought we should clarify the word enlightenment and what it means in general, and what it means to each of us that might be using the term, particularly as it relates to the major arcana and the journey we're talking about today. I know that word's used a lot, but I think it's like God. It means something different to everybody else. And a lot of people have a kind of a strange idea of what enlightenment means. They think, for example, that if you're enlightened, that you don't do anything wrong, and that you walk on water. It's sort of a, I don't know how to describe it, but it's not really in touch with reality. So maybe you could express what it is that enlightenment is from the perspective that we're going to explore, that the major arcana are pointing to.
Oh, look, I think simply put, enlightenment for me is about spiritual awareness. It's about being spiritually aware. And by that, it's awareness is bringing your attention, your perceptions, your thoughts, your feelings. It's about bringing those to what I would call the spiritual values. And so enlightenment is somebody who understands what spiritual values are, and is somebody who is making a practice of living a life that's aligned with those spiritual values.
How would you distinguish religious values from spiritual values? Because one of the most common things people say on surveys today is that they're spiritual and not religious. So I think, I'd like to hear what your conception of spiritual, what the word spiritual means, and how those values might be different than other values.
So to me, the ultimate spiritual values are peace, first and foremost, unconditional love, supreme happiness, and beauty. So those four things are what I call the four spiritual values. And of course, religious values, if they align with those four things, then they're spiritual values. But otherwise, they're going to be caught up in values. And we know, for example, historically, and that's a big part of what the cards were depicting, were worldly values. And that was about status. And so, we have a whole lot of religions that have a whole agenda about establishing their status as being the only religion. This is the religion. So status plays a big part within a lot of religious circles. You've got power, and there's these huge issues of conformity, needing people to conform, and having rules that have you accepted or rejected within a community, in terms of achievement, proving that we're the best, and so there's a whole lot of those things which were, the worldly values were depicted. And it's interesting that one of the cards that's listed in the worldly values is the Pope card.
Yeah.
Based on my approach. And so I think it's kind of interesting that I don't wish to offend any Catholics, but as it was depicted in these particular set of images, the Pope sits fair and square right in the middle of the narrative in the cards about worldly values, and he represented status. And this was the time where the Pope had a triple tiara, where he was saying, I'm the king of the world. I'm the advocate for God and head of the church. 3 tiaras, 3 crowns. If that's not about status, I don't know what is.
Yeah. Well, I describe spirituality as the progressive connection to a greater whole. And I think from the perspective of enlightenment, that's really what enlightenment ultimately is. It's an ongoing process in which you realize yourself as inherently part of something larger and larger. I think if you use the concept of God as a correlate to the horizon, no matter how much we grow into what we would call enlightenment, the horizon always extends itself. You can never reach it. It's an infinite horizon. So I think enlightenment isn't really a destination. It's a process of ultimately becoming less and less conditional and more unconditional in our capacity to love. And I think when we reach a certain stage of our own evolution, then we have the ability to choose nirvana, which in Joseph Campbell's terms is to blow out or extinguish, which would be the sense of individuality and become one with the Tao again. Joseph Campbell has a lot to say about why you shouldn't rush to do that. But
Yeah.
my point being is, I think if we look at spirituality as connection to a progressively greater whole, I think that story is also in the major arcana.
Mm-hmm. Oh, absolutely. And those four things that I talked about aren't, they're progressive. They're not sort of, there's an ongoing, there's an infinite connection with those four states of being. They're not finite by any stretch of the imagination, as you explained about unconditional love and developing that expanded experience of that. Yeah.
Before we dive in, I thought it'd be important. I'd love to hear you share your perspective regarding why what we're going to cover today is important and relevant to the issues of the world that we're all facing right now, because a conversation like this can seem very spiritual. Some would call it New Age spirituality or whatever they want to call it, but it could be taken as something apart from the issues of the world, kind of like some people's spiritual practice is to go isolate themselves, but they don't really carry that into their normal everyday work world. I think a great example of that is Yuval Noah Harari, who admits he does up to 60-day meditation retreats, but yet still says there is no God and there is no soul. And so there you see someone who's so-called meditating, but it doesn't seem to make it doesn't import that practice of what we would call spiritual development isn't importing into the reality of the world. It's almost like there's two separate people: the public Harari and the private Harari, and they're not integrating themselves, which is what often happens to people that use plant medicines. They're very spiritual while the drug's in their body, but then they go back to being the same person they ever were and have to keep doing it and doing it and doing it, and nothing seems to change. So how do you feel what we're going to cover today is relevant to the issues of the world we're all facing right now?
It's interesting that from my perspective, our experience as a human being sits somewhere between the spectrum of what I call supreme happiness and suffering, and what we're dealing with in the world. And I mean, and this isn't new. I mean, this is something that the planet goes through these cycles. But there's I don't know about, I can only speak about my experience here in Australia, but in the last 2 years, in the last 18 months, the economic situation is causing a huge amount of suffering for people. Right now, we've got a world where people are really hurting. And but it's based on the fact that the context for which people measure their sense of happiness is all acquired. So in other words, we live in a world where acquired happiness is the framework for how people measure their experience, and if their acquisition is compromised, then they're suffering. And that's what we're seeing happening right now. We've got this incredible situation of global suffering, but it's always been there. That said, when there's also a place where we can actually find a place of happiness that's innate, as opposed to acquired. And the significance of what we're talking about today is helping people find how it's possible to connect into innate happiness. And innate happiness allows you to be in that place of beauty, love, joy, and peace, in spite of things being difficult in the world around you. In other words, and it's not that you're denying or as it relates to what's happening in the world, but you're able to stay in your place of peace. And, if any of the listeners have been to third world countries, it's amazing how many times you see people suffering, but I've seen people just totally happy and joyful, and they have nothing. And, and so what these beautiful 22 images portray is how it's possible to have innate happiness as a way of being. And at the end of the day, for most people, if most people are happy, then they're okay. And that's what these guys were doing, was they were basically saying who you truly are is supreme happiness. That's your true nature. And it's been covered up. And this is about the removing of those things that have us not recognize our true supreme nature and supreme happiness, and that we're able to have that. And one of my favorite teachers is Rupert Spira, and he uses the model of clouds and the blue sky, and he says the blue sky is supreme happiness, and clouds are the stress of life. And most of us think that life is all grey cloud, and every once in a while a blue cloud appears. And we think that and we think that's that's it. That it's a cloud of happiness that comes by occasionally, whereas in fact, get rid of the grey clouds, and what you realise is that there's a whole blue sky there. It's such a beautiful analogy. And really that's what these cards are doing, is taking away the grey clouds and helping people find the blue sky.
Yeah. Well, I think too, one of the things that's important to understand for people listening is that, the world's getting more and more complicated. I recently read a statistic from the United States here showing that 70% of the US population right now cannot meet their core survival needs without using credit cards, credit card debts at the all-time high ever recorded. And so those are, obviously when you can't put food on the table, maybe you might get evicted from your apartment or whatever. That's very, very stressful. And we saw when COVID, the pandemic kicked off and people couldn't go to work, that was a very, very high stress time. But one of the things that I noticed, for example, we have Chek professionals all over the world, and those that were creative, that took the opportunity to sort of reinvent themselves or package themselves in another way and do online coaching, or maybe found out which of their clients weren't so afraid of social distancing and masking and were willing to come meet them and train in their garage or, do whatever they could do, actually did pretty well. Some of them even had growth in their businesses during the pandemic, while others went into a state of destitute. The point I'm making is one of the functions of a spiritual practice is to root you into these deeper principles, such as impermanence, and realizing that everything comes and goes, including our body, but that if we can maintain a state of deeper connection to our soul and to whatever our source that we might refer to as God, or that which we think is our highest power, or that which is beyond the fluctuations of the temporary existence that we're all living out as an opportunity for love and relationship and growth, then we actually can use the tarot as a guide for helping us gain strength and clarity as to what is meaningful and what is lasting and what is something worthy of stress versus just acting habitually and kind of believing the narrative on the news, most of which is just designed to keep you freaked out. So I think if for me, my tarot practice, which is part of my spiritual practice, is a way to connect to my soul every day, because I let my soul draw the cards. I just get myself completely out of it. Typically, I do a 6-card morning draw just to sort of get the weather report for the day, so I can say, okay, I got at 2:00, I've got the Tower card and I'm seeing such and such a patient. So, I'm probably going to need some temperance at that time, or, it's just, it's a great way for me to get the ego out of the way. But why that's been so nourishing to me over the many years I've used that as part of my practice is because it's a daily practice of letting go to the part of you that is ultimately connected to everything. Like the self is nature. The self is the solar system and the galaxy and the universe, and it's ultimately the divine expressing itself in time for its own self-realization and its own experience. So I think when we realize that we're part of something much, much bigger, and that we're never alone, and that we do always have inner guidance, and that when we learn through tarot and other practices to stop trying to figure it out from the ego and let the soul or the spirit or the highest self guide us, then these types of practices give us an opportunity to let go of trying to make decisions from the head and see what the heart has to say, see what the instincts, the gut has to say, see what the tarot has to say. And then I don't think, feel so isolated. I think the habit of trying to do it from the ego structure is a major part of the problem, because the ego is ultimately created out of everybody else's ideas. That's what it is. It's a nexus of other people's ideas that we've unconsciously, largely unconsciously, embedded within ourselves because we've either been taught it as education or it comes by way of belief. But really, the ego is made of yesterday. It's not really a construct that's in the present. The only way we can be in the present is to actually let go of the ego. And I think that's really a lot of what the tarot journey is all about.
Are you tired of feeling stuck? Whether you're stuck in your career, your health, or your daily routine, getting out of a rut can feel overwhelming. But I'm here to offer you the push you need to escape that rut. Here is your chance to transform your life from the inside out, to break free of whatever has been holding you back, and to make a lasting change to your life and career. The Chek Academy is the answer, bringing you fulfillment and purpose with step-by-step assistance, guidance, and learning. You'll be equipped to improve your health, and if you choose, guide others through their transformation too. And because the Chek Academy is designed for full-time workers, you can make this life-changing leap while still managing your regular day-to-day commitments. In year 1, you'll gain tools and strategies that really work, not quick fixes that are unsustainable. Starting with Paul's book, How to Eat, Move, and Be Healthy, you'll learn how to build healthy habits. Then you'll expand on these in Holistic Lifestyle Coach Level 1 online. Integrated Movement Science Level 1 online and the prerequisites will show you how to train with confidence and precision. Chek mentors and faculty are there to guide and support you as you progress, as well as the community of your fellow students in the Chek Academy. We're now accepting applications for the spring enrollment, but don't wait, as these close on March 31st. So go to chek.group/L4D Academy. That's chek.group/L4D Academy. You know your best self is just waiting for you to make the decision. So come join us and turn 2025 into the year your vision becomes your reality.
I think that there's an additional component to that, and that is grace, and the ego, the tarot journey, particularly when we start to get into the cards that are promoting this sense of the words I use is purification, illumination, is that in fact what we end up doing is finding ourselves beginning to, first of all, understand, but beginning to recognize the way in which grace starts to open the doors, and grace starts to bring that abundance. And in fact, what happens is you move to the place where you're able to attune to grace being your source of abundance, and learning to trust and grace manifesting and opening doors. And and look, it's bizarre. A few weeks ago, I hit a dingo, which is one of our wild dogs, and my car was written off.
Oh, really? It damaged your car that bad? Wow.
Badly. And so I'm riding. I have a scooter, a 650 Suzuki scooter, and I'm riding that around. And I just did a big trip to about 700 k's over the weekend, and came home. And yesterday I went to go down to my village to get some things, and as I went down, my battery died. And it's like, here I am in my own environment where my battery breaks. It could have been in the middle of the highway out in the middle of nowhere yesterday on the weekend, and it happened yesterday. And instead of getting upset and discombobulated about my battery, I'm joyful because it happened. It happened close to home where I could remedy the situation easily and get a friend to help. And, that's, to me, they're graceful moments. And I see that happening more and more in my reality. It doesn't mean to say that life doesn't happen, but it can happen with grace. And of course the beauty, and that's one of the lessons of living in the forest, is that I'm watching grace manifesting through nature constantly. When you look at the growth and the development, and you see the little birds, we've just gone through the season of all these beautiful little birds being created, and seeing that, and you're looking at, and you sort of think, none of these things have to do anything for grace to manifest other than to be. Mm-hmm. And so that's what the tarot is bringing us to, is this place where we can actually trust that grace provides our abundance.
And when you use the term grace, are you meaning the gift of God's presence, or the ever-present offering?
The nature of the divine, the nature of source, the nature of infinite consciousness is abundance. It knows nothing else. It doesn't mean to say that within this world we don't have other elements taking place within this world, but even with all of that, there's still this capacity for this abundant nature of the divine. And I use the word grace because it's just such a beautiful word to describe that experience, to keep on turning up. Mm-hmm. And it does. And so all of a sudden, the more that we're able to do that, when these difficult times present, and that's just part of the human experience, it doesn't mean that we have to suffer. What these guys were saying is that the nature of abundance is the nature of the divine. And when we attune to that, that doesn't mean to say that we have $1 million in the bank. What we have, as you said before, we have a whole lot of measures about what is happiness is for most of us as human beings, is programmed into us in terms of what we believe happiness to be. And that, once again, that's what the Emperor and the Empress are doing. They're programming us about what's going to define who we are in the world.
Yeah, that's a great footing to start from. So now let's go ahead and dive into this journey. As you know, the journey through the process of tarot begins with 0, the Fool. So maybe we can start with the Fool and explain the meaning of each of these cards as we go, and see how the story unfolds and what it's telling us about ourselves, and maybe not only what it's telling us about ourselves, but what is each archetype saying as a process of unfolding. I was studying tarot, and I came across a concept I wondered if you were familiar with. Have you heard the concept of seed cards? Well, it was very interesting. I was studying a Jungian book on tarot by Sally Nichols, a famous Jungian analyst, really deep woman. But she pointed out that every fourth card is a seed card. So you start, she doesn't include 0 as the big, because, a lot of decks use 22 as the full, and they begin with 1, not 0. So she was showing how if you take 1, the Magician, plus 3, the Emperor, that's a seed card. Then the Emperor, 4 plus 3 is 7, 7 and 3 is 10, then 13, then 16, then 19. And she said that seed cards are all cards that represent transitional states where there's a change in the way that you're relating to yourself and or the world. I won't go into the whole discussion, but she was describing it from the perspective of individuation, the Jungian concept of growing into wholeness and becoming not only whole, but becoming an adult, not just in the physical sense, but in the spiritual sense. But as I looked at that concept, I could really see, looking at just what we're going to talk about today, that there is definitely a transitional state in each of those seed cards. So that might be something interesting to throw into our exploration today. But I'll leave it to you. We'll make our way through. I'll share some comments where I have them or some questions, but fire away with the Fool. Cheers.
Well, as you say, the Fool in traditional pacts doesn't have a number. He's without a number, and part of the essence of that for me is that he's movable. He's not stationary. He's on the journey, and because he looks like a journeyman. He's walking, and he's got his little backpack on his stick, and he's on a journey, and he's every man, every woman who's on the journey. And I would suggest to you that in from my perspective, the Fool doesn't truly emerge until the Empress, who's the mother. And so he sort of enters into reality, the point at which she gives birth to him. And so what we've got is these other cards that sort of sit before those. And now, if we work with the numbers 1 and 2, we've got the Magician and we've got the Popess in their Marseille Tarot description.
Yeah, Popess is the High Priestess and others.
High Priestess. So you have to please excuse me, but I'm a total devotee to the Marseille Tarot. So anytime you choose to help other people understand the other cards, it's more that I'll forget more than anything to make reference.
Yeah, it's
to
okay.
that.
I think if we're couching this in archetypes, the thing that I'd like to share is the Fool is actually symbolically God coming into its own creation. And, God, unconditional love, can't be mathematically symbolized, so it has to be a 0, which isn't a number. It's a symbol for that which is but isn't. And so that's the paradox of God, the is and the isn't of everything. The Fool really, in line with what you were saying, doesn't really emerge in physical reality until the mother, because you can't come by way of life without a mother and a father. So there's sort of a tie between the major arcana of the archetype, the Empress and the Emperor, because that's the mother and the father. And then the other aspects of it, the soul in my conception exists prior to birth. So that would be the High Priestess. The Magician is the mind, and that's the matrix, which we'll get into. So you can see that the cards are talking about a process which in alchemy would be described as God consciousness moving down through the elemental ranges from higher to lower vibration, or the condensation of consciousness. But I think the thing to remember, I think from my perspective, is that the Fool represents God within each of us going through its own journey of self-realization. And that's a very important concept. I think people forget that God exists within them because we have so much religious iconography and ideology about God being out there separate from creation. You know, you need to go to the church to get to God, and, you know, all the kind of the dogma that really leads to a lot of religious emptiness.
So probably if we back up a moment, and this is probably one of the things that makes my work a little unique, is in terms of how the cards are laid out. Because yes, we have that element of the sequence, and that's very, very clearly described in numbers 1 through 21, and the Fool being card 0 or without a number. But the sequence is one thing, but how that sequence is laid out, you made reference to Sonny Nickel using that sort of every fourth point. One of the things that happened for me in coming to the understanding that I have about the cards was the way in which the cards were to be laid out. And that was inspired by the hats of card number 1 and card number 11, which is the strength card, card number 11, and card number 1 being the magician. And their hats basically had the shape of a lemniscate. Right. So it's a lazy 8, if I can use that expression. And that became the basis for me relating to the cards in terms of how they were laid out. So what we ended up with was cards 1 through 5 sort of took the bottom left-hand loop of the lemniscate. Then cards 6 through 10 took the left-hand, as we're looking at the cards, left-hand upper loop. And then as we come back across to the other side of the figure 8, we had cards 11 through 15 taking the bottom right loop, and then cards 16 through 20 taking the upper right. And then card 21 sort of became the crown of the hat. And so we put it in the middle. And so the world card sits right in the middle of this figure 8, this lemniscate. So now we've taken the sequence of numbers 1 through 21, and we've now added another dimension in terms of we've now got a dimension of movement as it relates to these, and a system, a process that brings another dimension of understanding of relationship. And of course, a part of the thesis of my book was that the tarot was Cathar inspired, and hopefully we can have some time to talk about that, because I've developed some new appreciation and understanding of who the Cathar were and what that meant in terms of this. And it's quite different to the traditional, or no, not traditional, modern understanding of the Cathar. And and that's important because it helps us understand why this is important in the layout. So what we have, and so let me bring this right to what we're talking about. The central card is the world card, and the world card houses within it probably it's the alpha and omega. It's source, it's infinite consciousness. And the most important symbol, I believe, in all of the cards, depicted in all of the symbols, is actually the space behind the sacred yoni, the vesicus Pisces, that almond shape in the middle of the world card. The space behind that is the most important symbol in all of the cards, and that is God. That is I am. That is source. And what I've done in my PowerPoint presentations, I've created an image where you actually go inside that and you turn around and you look from there through the vesicus Pisces and you see the back of the dancer. And all of a sudden, we're now in the position of infinite consciousness, source, God, whatever you want to call that, looking through this little window within its state of being. And within that, it's starting to explore the whole notion that there's 4 different aspects of its being represented by the bull, the lion, the eagle, and the angel. And then within that, we all of a sudden have a magician who's representative, and as you say, and the high priestess, who's the popess in my language, they become representative of the elements of the spirit world. And she has a veil beside her, which is the veil, which is infinite consciousness is now entertaining or dreaming, exploring infinite possibility. That's what this is all about, is infinite consciousness exploring infinite possibility, starting with the spirit world and then moving into the human experience, which is passing the veil that sits between the Empress and the Popess. And now we have the human experience. And as you rightly said, that birth of the Fool is infinite consciousness. That's the divine coming through and wanting to experience part of this infinite possibility, this universe of possibility. And of course, I'd like to suggest that all of it is nothing but God's dream.
Yes, I agree 100%. That's exactly the position I take in Spirit, Jim. And the reason I do, you can even, look at it numerologically. There's a lot of books out there on the mind of God, and you see even mystics and gurus saying God's thinking it all into existence. I have many such quotes that I've collected over the years. But the problem is God can't be thinking creation into existence, because that's a duality. So that's 2 complete steps removed from zero, the Fool. So the only alternative is, like in the Bible, it says man is made in God's image. So I say that everything about us, our imagination, our creativity, our capacity for love, etc., are qualities that are only in us because they're inherent in the divine. And when we dream, we're sound asleep and we're not thinking, we're dreaming. There's a big difference between thinking and dreaming. And we create all sorts of amazing things in our dreams. And oftentimes our dreams turn out to be true. And we can have a dream for our life. And if we focus on it, then our chances of manifesting it are a lot better by directing our consciousness through intention into our stated dream, goal, or objective. But my point is, you don't get to a duality until you get to the field of 2, whereas God is 0, but creation has to have emerged prior to mind, because there would be no means by which there would be subject and object unless God brought those together within itself first. And the act of dreaming creates characters. It's when the characters begin to say, and experience love and relationship, that I believe mind emerges. So I think I have an agreement philosophically with you. And I think the tarot archetypes are telling us that.
Yeah, and I think your model or your reminder that we all dream, and in that dream state, when we're in the dream state, it's real.
It's often more real than
everything
this.
that we're everything in that dream state is real, and its reality is evidenced by what people experience when they wake up and they've got the threads of those dreams still there and they're sweating or they're aroused or anything that's been going on in that dream was real while you were in the dream. And the minute you woke up, it wasn't real anymore.
or it was. I mean, for
only in the dream state it was real. But in terms of, and so this is exactly the same with the way in which infinite consciousness is experiencing infinite possibility. It's a dream state, ultimately. And the minute that well, it's not that God wakes up, God's always awake, but it realizes that it appears real while you're in it. Touch, taste, sight, sound, and smell, all those perceptions are fully active. Yes. And it seems that it's real until not. But, that carries on because here's an interesting phenomenon. And that is when you dream and you have an affair in your dream or you murder somebody in a dream, are you accountable?
Well, I would imagine if you stayed in the dream state, you would find out because there would be an experience that goes with it. And a lot of people have dreams in which they feel guilt and shame and sadness, right?
Yeah.
So,
but when you wake up, do you have to have the punishment for anything that happened in that dream?
I don't think so, unless you do it to yourself.
So this whole notion then of is God going to punish us? And that's a religious tradition that emerged. And basically what this would suggest, this is God's dream.
Well, not only
For
that,
heaven's sake.
There's another fundamental flaw in that whole ideology. If God is God, by definition, God is that for which there is no other. Therefore, there can't be anything here that isn't God. And the idea of God punishing you is God punishing itself. And so I tell people, if you're going to choose a God, choose one that's smarter than that, because that's a very abusive relationship with oneself. But the other thing, too, about dreaming is, look, you can have orgasms in dreams, and you wake up and you have tangible evidence that the dream was real. Right. So there's a level of reality, and you wake up and you can be scared to death, covered in sweat. You can get up in the middle of a dream and run through the house because you think you're being chased. So I think the key point that I'm driving at here is that the dream state actually is as real or more real in many ways than what we call our waking state. And I think what the tarot are showing us through the evolution that we're here discussing is that we actually awaken to the dream, and what we awaken to ultimately shows us that what we call being awake is actually really being asleep until you truly awake. And the yogis actually say that if you get deep enough into yourself through meditation and spiritual development, that you will actually realize that you are really sleepwalking in most of your life, and that you are more conscious in your dream state than you are in your waking state. And so, in consciousness studies, they talk about the stages of consciousness, waking, sleeping, dreaming, and then deep sleepless dreaming. But I think when we really realize that the dream is, first of all, the dream of God manifests mind and it manifests love, right? Because if God is that for which there is no other. So if God does not have the dream of other, there's no way God can experience love, because that which is unconditional has no self. So God actually dreams itself into existence, and in that begins to have relationships with the characters in the dream. And that is when you have the flow of energy and information between 2 points of sentience. The characters in the dream respond to God consciousness, not realizing it's God consciousness inside of them. And so now you actually have God relating to God, but it creates the illusion of other, without which you can't have love. And without love, there's no flow of energy and information. Therefore, that's why I define love as the flow of energy and information through empathic and compassionate connection to self or other. And that's exactly what it takes to create a mind. Dan Siegel, for example, says mind is an embodied and relational process that regulates the flow of energy and information. So you have to have a relationship. In other words, the difference between a mind and a information processor is you and I are sentient, and we can make meaning out of the information flowing between us. But a computer doesn't know whether you're talking about making an atomic bomb or chicken soup. It's not conscious. So that's not a mind, that's an information processor. The point that I'm making is God wakes up in its own dream through relationship, which is the basis of love, and love becomes the basis of mind. And I think the cards actually tell that story.
Yep. So when we've got this world card, and the first thing that we come to beyond the dancer, and we'll talk about the dancer a bit later on, is the bull, the lion, the eagle, and the angel. And these four represent essentially four states of consciousness. So the bull represents the state of perception as it relates to the physical. Even spirit has a physical element to it. You know, when we're talking about spirit world, you've got the angel, which is the element of air, which is the element of mind. You have the lion, which is associated with desire and the element of fire, and you have the eagle, which is the element associated with water and emotion. And so what we've got is these states of beingness that is the first state of separation, I guess, from infinite consciousness. That sacred yoni I call the I am portal. It's the portal that I, infinite consciousness, which is the being, its infinite being, passes through that portal into am. It's the am, and the am then connects to experience. So now, passing through the I am portal, I am experiencing thoughts, feelings, perceptions, and desires. Yes. Is now what's being experienced in that four. Now, what's interesting is that when Adam and Eve were kicked out of the Garden of Eden, God put two tests at the eastern gate, or two gatekeepers. One was cherubim and the other was the flaming sword. And cherubim, according to Ezekiel, was an angel figure that had four faces: a bull, a lion, an eagle, and an angel. And so, but all in one body. And so what we have is one of the tests is bringing consciousness back into the whole as it relates to perception, thoughts, feelings, and desires. And that's represented in the judgment card. We see Michael the archangel blowing a trumpet, and he's got there's a standard, a flag hanging off the trumpet, and it's got a cross in it, and it's the four, and they're white and gold, depending on which version you've got. But they represent this is the test of consciousness, proving that it's fully integrated back into whole. The other one is the flaming sword, and the flaming sword is being held in the left hand of the devil. In the devil card, he's holding a flaming sword. You know, this is fundamental to this core teaching. And it's like, I say to people, how many sermons have you heard in church about passing the test of the cherubim and the flaming sword in order to enter back into union with God? And these guys had it depicted in these cards. And so from a slightly different perspective to Sally Nichols' approach, the four for example, I see as fundamental. So we see the four depicted in the Emperor and the Empress represent one of four. The other two, so the symbols are seen in the cards. So the Emperor and the Empress have a scepter and orb. Now, normally the scepter and orb are separate, but in the tarot, they're joined. And basically what that's saying is the Emperor and the Empress are joined, representing one out of four. So those two cards become one, and they're number one. Then you go to the Pope, and what's he got? He's got two figures in front of him and two poles behind him. He represents two. Then you go to the Lover's card, and what have we got? We've got the central figure, and he's got three figures around him. He's got a young woman, an older woman, and Eros. And so that's three. Then we go to the Chariot, and what's the shape of the Chariot? It's in a square, and it's got four corners. And it represents element number 4. Okay. Then we go to the next phase. Now, the next phase is, and that's talking about the human experience. So let's talk about this. So the Emperor and the Empress is our programming. So this is who we're programmed by as a child, by the Empress, and then as we move into adulthood, we're programmed by the Emperor. They're our mother and father. And they're basically programming us about how you can be happy in the world. Yes. That's what they're teaching us.
From their conception.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's why we have all these different perceptions on what happiness is. Some people think happiness is having a lot of money in the bank. Some people think happiness is having love. Some people think happiness is being self-empowered, not being a victim.
Some people think happiness is unachievable.
Absolutely. And so that's our programming, and that's about power and compliance. Yeah. So the Emperor and the Empress represent compliance. That's about following the rules.
Yeah, just to keep so that we don't lose people, I'd like to go by the number if we can. Because we've jumped around from 0 to 21 to 3 and 4. So the Fool goes to 1, the mind, the magician, which really, from my conception, represents the mind. How would you state the magician as the first step in the sequence of enlightenment?
Right. So I've got to put the magician and the popess together, and they're in the spirit world.
Yes.
So the moment that consciousness or infinite consciousness passes through the I am portal. So remember, I'm working on a lemniscate.
An infinite, basically a sideways figure for the listeners.
Yep. So the 1 is not separate from 21.
Okay, right, because it's sitting on top of it, in the middle.
That he's down in that bottom left-hand corner where the bull is, and this is the spirit world. So this is where consciousness is in spirit and soul essence. So now we're talking about in the Greek tradition. They talk about soul and spirit. They essence and energy, if you want to call it that, and basically. The spirit world is this whole notion that we have a spirit being, a spirit essence, and that's part of, and I like to use the analogy, and this will all come in, that passing through that I am portal is like white light passing through a prism, and all of a sudden we have. In our understanding, we have this rainbow of 7 colours, and that rainbow represents the essence of spirit being.
Yes. Yeah.
And what we're doing is going through an evolution of expanded understanding. You can call it chakras. I'm going to suggest to you, and we'll talk about this later on, the Beatitudes, the 7 core Beatitudes from the Sermon on the Mount, represent that evolutionary process of the 7 of becoming aligned with oneness with God. So we go through a process. So that's part of that rainbow effect. But at the same time, it's being modulated through the four, represented by the bull, the lion, the eagle, and the angel. So who's the magician? So the magician basically represents the energy in the spirit world that is explaining what it is that you're doing here, what it is that what this separation from infinite source is all about. And on his table, he's got these symbols of consciousness, which is reflected through a cup, dice, coins, and a wand.
Yes,
and they're all on his table.
And I'm just going to say, in Rider-Waite, it's the wand for fire, it's the cup for love, it's the sword for air, and it is the pentacle or the coin for earth, just so people have a correlation, because there's no dice in that edition of tarot.
Right. Okay. And so so what we've got is this. He's basically saying that you're going to go from spirit world into an incarnation, and you're going to, and this is going to be the context in which you're going to incarnate is into this environment. And then the Popess is sitting there with a book, and she's saying, so in your previous incarnations, this is what you've done.
Yes.
You get to choose what you want to incarnate as and be and experience this time. Where do you want to go? This is about making the decision as a spirit entity now. So this is the first sense of separation that we have in the sense that where something's different to source is this spirit being. And the spirit being has a choice about incarnation, and it can either incarnate or not, and when you listen to, the likes of Nancy Dennison and her stuff on near-death experiences, she talked about her experience, and she's sitting there looking at all of the lives in all of these other places that she's been that had nothing to do with being a human being. Right. In terms of what those incarnations can be, is a heck of a lot more than restricted to just here on Earth. She's saying that there are just so many other ways that we get to incarnate, that it's unlimited in terms of that. And so she's saying, but here we are choosing to come into Earth, and we're wanting to incarnate and have this experience. And so here we negotiate what that is, and we then get to go with parents who are going to make our incarnation and what we want to learn possible. And so basically what we have is the magician basically telling us what the playground is going to look like. Even his table is interesting, because what we only see in the classical tarot is 3 legs. And he's basically saying there's 4 legs to this journey. He said, and who is part of I'm an illusionist, I'm a trickster, that's what a magician is. I'm creating illusion. I have power over 3 legs of this journey. In other words, there's 1 leg of this journey I don't have any power over. But 3 of it, I have the ability to keep on drawing you back into the illusion of separation, back into the idea, which is enhancing your incarnation experience. In other words, I'm going to do everything that I can in the areas that I have control over to be able to have you fully experience what it is you want to learn. Right. In this incarnation.
In the Rider-Waite, you only see 2 legs. It's half the table is missing. And so in the model of Spirit Gem, I point out the fact that you cannot see mind. You can only see the results of it, and you cannot see spirit. You can only see the results of it. So when you look at the 4 symbols on the table, fire, is divine fire or divine desire. You don't see it, you experience it. That's the spirit realm. Then mind, which is also spirit, you don't see that either. You only see the results of it. But you do see the element of water and emotion, and you do see the element of earth and embodiment. And so from a scientific perspective, the half of the table that's missing is what I say correlates to the implicate order of David Bohm. It's the invisible order that unfolds into the physical world. It's the creative realm. Steiner says the spiritual realm is the realm of causes and that the physical realm is the realm of effects. And so we can't see the creative intelligence. We can only see the effects of it. And so the magician is saying there's always something you cannot see, and there is something that you will experience. So you need to be aware that all four of these elements are at play. But interestingly, a table is synonymous with a field. A field is a place of action. So half the field in the Rider-Waite and some of it in the Marseille is missing. And so the place of action is beyond what you can perceive with your physical senses, which is why spiritual development brings you into extrasensory perception. And that's why some of us can speak to people on the other side and see angels and nature spirits. And then we realize what the other half of the table is, and it makes life a lot more magical. So I think part of the evolution through the tarot is gaining the extrasensory abilities, which you can only do through purification and self-development, so that you can see the other hand of the magician that's normally sleight of hand.
Yeah. And so, he's basically, he's a billboard for what you're going to be experiencing. He's basically sitting there sort of saying, this if you're choosing to incarnate to planet Earth, I'm the spiritual billboard letting you know what you're up for. This is the world that you're about to enter, and you have to understand the fact that I'm a magician. You have to understand that this is an illusion. Yeah. This isn't real. It looks real, feels, tastes, smells real, but you just have to, and that's part of what goes on is that that's the advertisement. And then, as I say, card number 2, which is the Popess, she's got the Book of Life, and she's basically saying, well, you're choosing to incarnate again, and you're choosing to incarnate this time on planet Earth, and you know what you're up for, and that's the negotiation of the incarnation. Yeah. That we choose to encounter.
So there's lots I can say on these things because I have my own conceptions and studies.
Yes.
But I don't want to slow us down too much because you and I could probably do a podcast easily on each of these archetypes. But so now we've got the Fool. He's met the Magician. He's met his own soul or God within, his essence. That's self-consciousness. Now it's time for a mother and a father. That brings us into the indoctrination process so we can develop an ego and a sense of self-awareness in this reality and participate in it. So from there we go to the Pope or the Hierophant in most decks. Not the Pope. In Marseille it's the Pope, and some decks have a Popess as well.
Well, that's the High Priestess. She's the
Popess. So some decks just name them differently. So take us now to, if there's more you want to elaborate on the Empress and the Emperor, then please do.
Well, there's one of the things that's really evident in the early cards is what appears to be feathers on the left hip of the Empress when she's sitting in her chair, and those feathers were called, and Harold Bailey in his book on symbolism, or books on symbolism, talked about the zigzag of effulgence, which was the zigzag, was this feather effect, and this is on her buttock. And you said this a little bit earlier on. This is reminding us that what she's giving birth to, yes, it's the Fool, but in fact, the zigzag effulgence is Christ consciousness. This is in fact divine source that she's giving birth to. Don't forget that this is the essence of who the Fool is that it's infinite consciousness. Yeah. And so there's this beautiful reminder in these cards of this zigzag of effulgence that's sitting beside her buttock. And that's a really important reminder of who this person is, that in terms of its true essence on this journey. And then we see she's holding a shield with the immature eagle, the eagle representing this zigzag of effulgence by virtue of its wings. And so this is her sort of programming the child, and a big part of my work, and as much as I live in the mountain and I'm isolated, I have really excellent internet, and I mentor people all over the world. So so what we have is this programming, and this is a big part of what I do when I work with people, that takes place within the first 7 years of our life. Give me a child until he is 7, and I'll give you the man. This is the Jesuits and Aristotle were teaching this whole concept of the programming of the child. Well, that's what's happening. The mother's got the shield on her hip. She's holding it. It's like she's nurturing it. This is the child being programmed. And as I said before, this is being programmed about how to be happy. If you do this, this, and this for me, I'll be happy and you'll be happy. That's basically what goes on. And so what we've got is this situation of being programmed about what it takes to stay happy in life. And so, we all have a narrative, and our childhood narrative, ultimately is about what we had to do in order to be happy.
Which is to get love and a sense of being valued, wanted, and needed at the end of the day, which can radically change from family to family.
Or it could be, if there is no love, feeling happy because I can eat food. Yeah. Or at a very young age, I become and experience sexual arousal, or I have an abusive situation that I don't know is abuse, but it's a sexual experience, and I'm happy if I'm sexual. In other words, we have all these different ways that we develop about how I can be happy based on what goes on in those formative years. Yeah. Then we go to the emperor, and the shield's on the ground behind his foot, and the bird's matured. And this is like, now you've got to do it how the father engages the world. So you have to do it how I turn up in the world. It was interesting. I was in a cafe yesterday where I knew the young fellow had just been to uni, had his first year at university, and I said, how did it go? And he was doing music. And that was the thing that he was passionate about. And he said, I've changed my course. And I said, what are you going to do? He said, I've decided to do business finance. And I'm going, business finance? I mean, that's a completely different world. Why business finance? Well, that's what Dad does.
There you go.
All of a sudden, his passion for music and what he loved and how he had a band and doing his thing got completely turned upside down. And here's the emperor now having his influence, whether it's direct or indirect. But all of a sudden, here's this young man decided that he needed to be more focused on success in the world and financial success.
If you see him again, tell him don't throw his instruments away because he'll need them for his midlife crisis.
But here's a perfect example of the emperor now impacting on the essence of the evolving young man. Okay, so this is about then looking at the bigger picture of the world, and that is, how can you be happy in the world if you've got autonomy, if you've got status, if you've got acceptance, and if you've got achievement, then you'll be happy. That's the world of illusion. And the Emperor is basically preparing us for how we succeed to maintain happiness in the world of illusion.
Right.
Okay?
Yeah, I think too, I just want to, because the word illusion can lead people into sort of, it can cause confusion, because they'll say things like, well, my husband just asked me for a divorce and I'm broke. Those are not illusions. And Arthur Young, in his book, I believe it's The Reflexive Universe. It might be, I've read all of his books. I can't remember which one, but he's talking about how he's talking to somebody about this, and the guy drops a rock on his foot. And when he screams, he says, now tell me, was that an illusion? And so but the point is, Arthur Young makes a point when he's speaking of Maya, because Maya means illusion. He says, you have to understand that what we call Maya is not an illusion, it is the illusion. And it's all there is. Therefore, you must understand that you should participate fully in life, because even though it's an illusion, it's the grand illusion in which God experiences itself. There is nothing other, because behind this is the unconditional of God, and there's nothing to know, be, or do there.
And ultimately, there is no rock dropping on a foot and being experienced by God, as in, that's not God. What's infinite consciousness is real. And just like we dream, so we can have a rock drop on our foot when we're asleep, but when we wake up, do we have pain in our foot, or do we have damaged tissues on our feet as a result of a rock dropping in our sleep?
Well,
we have a momentary memory of the experience, but even that dwindles away. But there's no damage on our feet.
Yeah, I think that's part of the reason we're having this conversation on enlightenment, though, because, it takes quite a while to get to the point where you can actually say that with conviction based on life experience, versus it just being something that sounds cool and fits the cards.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Because,
yeah.
You drop your... I don't know any enlightened person that's ever walked on this planet that had a foot that wasn't susceptible to a reaction when a rock hits it. Now there's exceptional people now and then, like the Buddhist monks that light themselves on fire in protest of the Vietnam War and stuff like that, and they sit there and don't flinch as their body disintegrates. So they're clearly able to get out of the illusion. But that's a very, very high level of spiritual development that most people aren't going to reach for many lifetimes. But so I agree with you. I'm just trying to make the point that we're all still inherently caught in the state of unveiling the illusion, which is why this conversation is so important.
And that's what the cards are all about. That's what the cards are all about. So the next character beyond the Emperor, let me back up. So what we have is this whole programming, and the flaming sword is significant. And we'll talk about this later when we get to the devil card. But the flaming sword is about basically removing our attachment to our programming. You can't remove the programming, but you can remove your attachment or the way it impacts on you. And the flaming sword is the point at which we sever our attachment to the programming. And that'll come up later on. And that's what we've just been talking about. It's like, it's one of the ways that we go through the process of being able to minimize this being caught up in believing our human experience to be real. It is real while we're, like dreams, while we're in the experience, but once you wake up, you go, oh, hang on a second. No, that was real.
Mm-hmm. Now, there's There's a bit of a trick here I want to present to you. I know you know this, Russell. Many of the world's greatest inventions came by way of dreams. For example, the man that invented discovered the benzene ring had it come to him in a dream. Carl Jung had many of his greatest ideas come to him in dreams. Countless of the world's most famous inventors got their inventions through dreams. And there's a great documentary I watched talking about interviews with people that did not go to work the day the Twin Towers came down, because the night before they had a very vivid dream telling them something terrible was going to happen, that they shouldn't go to work. They didn't, and they lived because they had that dream. So I think it's very important to realize that the dream world is interfacing with this world. So you could say there's levels of dreaming, but within which all of it is God ultimately waking up to itself. So my point is that we don't want to give anybody the impression that the dream world isn't real or that this world isn't real. It's just that they're different levels of consciousness, but ultimately they're all an expression of the one experiencing itself for its own self-realization, because that which is unconditional cannot know itself without conditions. So it dreams to create the conditions for the experience of life, love, and self-realization.
Yeah. And it was dreams that had me unlock the lemniscate as related to the tarot.
There you go. Yeah, I only bring these things up because I just don't want people listening to get the wrong impression and think maybe somehow we're trying to imply that their life is just an illusion, so why get too into it? Or I think that it's for me as a therapist and as a life coach, I think that reality is what's happening right now, and reality is everything that's supporting us. And when we realize that the missing half of the table is happening right now, and it is supporting us, and the world is supporting us, and it is happening right now. And if you're dreaming the world, then you're having an experience. And if you're in the world, in the dream, you're having an experience. I think ultimately the great blessing of it all is it doesn't matter how you awaken, God always says yes.
If you have listened to even one episode of Paul's podcast before, then you will know that he is passionate, and some would say even fanatical, about the quality of the food he eats and where it is sourced from. That is why the Chek household only eats pasture-raised meat, wild-caught fish, and organic produce. And that is why we subscribe to Wild Pasture's meat delivery service. Each month, Wild Pastures delivers a box of meat that has been raised by family farmers in the USA using regenerative farming practices. 100% grass-fed and finished beef, pasture-raised chicken, and pasture-raised pork, as well as wild-caught seafood. You can customize the selection in your box, add on extra when you know you will be feeding more people, or change your options each and every month. You might be thinking that this will be too expensive for you, but Wild Pasture's mission is to offer the highest quality meat at the lowest prices because they want to transform the meat industry. And that means that more people need to be able to choose meat that is raised right. Their pasture-raised animals are part of a natural ecosystem. Their farmers use rotational grazing, practices that mimic nature, and so do not need to use synthetic fertilizers, pesticides, herbicides, hormones, or antibiotics. This beautiful process doesn't require the external resources, such as massive amounts of GMO grain, required with environmentally depleting conventional methods. And best of all, the meat and fish taste amazing. And for Paul's listeners, Wild Pastures are offering you 20% off your subscription for life, $15 off your first order, and free shipping. Seriously, you can't find a better deal for top quality pasture-raised meat. Go to wildpastures.com/Paul Chek. You don't need a promo code. Just visit wildpastures.com/Paul Chek and start choosing the goodies you will have delivered to you in your first box.
I'm totally on board with all that you're saying. What these cards are depicting, though, is that you can either have this experience from a place of suffering, or you can have it from a place of supreme happiness. Same life, same body, same world.
Yes.
But one is immersed in suffering. And these cards are talking about what causes our suffering. I mean, to the point where, based on my journey, we get to the crossroads, and after justice, time, and chance has its impact on us, and all of a sudden we can commit suicide. We can try to recreate another illusion in terms of wealth, power, love, and success. We can numb ourselves to reality through drugs, or addiction, or we can enter the dark night of the soul and go through and shift our values from unsustainable values to sustainable values. And basically what they were saying is that in this world that's based on unsustainable values, you're going to suffer if you only understand or only align with those values, because justice, the hermit, which is aging, and the wheel of fortune are all going to interfere with what you think is permanent and sustainable, and they're going to let you know that they're not. And we're going through that right now. Justice, time, and chance are playing out big time right now. Okay, so yes, we do. This is a real world, but in this world, if you are fully aligned with the values established through those four, the parents, the Pope, the lovers, and the Chariot, then you will suffer. You will be in a place of suffering, one way or another. But if you move into the dark night of the soul and go through that spiritual journey, which is the rest of the cards in the Lemniscate, cards 11 onwards, hang on a second, you can still be in this world where those things, you're still involved in those things, but they don't determine your happiness.
Right.
That's just how you play the world out because you're a human being. You can be in a place of supreme happiness and still have a partner and still have a house and still be successful.
And when you
not.
say supreme happiness, it's I think for a lot of people that's a hard one to interpret. It sounds like someone really high, like after orgasmic sex. But I really think you're meaning something much more of a state of equanimity, aren't you?
Equanimity.
The ability to be in the center of it all without getting lost in it.
Yeah, well, but I think that for us as a human being, because we identify with our state of suffering so much, what we want is to be able to propose an idea of something that's the opposite to suffering. I don't know if equanimity is the opposite to suffering, maybe. But a place of joyful bliss, a place of supreme happiness. They sound like abstract words, but this is sort of saying, well, that's the kind of experience that exists as a state of being aligned with love, peace, joy, and beauty as a way of life.
Right, yeah.
Because you think about it. If your life was immersed in beauty, wouldn't you be joyful?
Yes.
And happy if beauty was what you were experiencing at every turn? If inner peace and unconditional love was something that you had as a way of being, wouldn't you be happy and blissful and joyful?
Yeah, I think the reason I'm trying to get the distinction is because when you look at how the mind makes meaning, you can't have happiness unless you have unhappiness to give it meaning. You can't have north without south, or east without west, or inside without outside. Equanimity is a place that's in the middle. It's not caught in a happiness that's dependent upon unhappiness for its existence. That's why I tried to find a word that I thought matched what you were really saying with supreme happiness, because in order to have something be supreme happiness, it needs not to depend on its opposite to be real.
But this is what God is doing. God is experiencing what God isn't, so it better understands the nature of what it is.
That's true.
That's what infinite possibility is.
That's what evil's all about.
So suffering is about the experience of the infinite being able to better appreciate, if I can use that, and I use that very loosely, but to better appreciate its true nature, which is, in my language, supreme happiness. That's who it is. It's that all the time. It's nothing else but that essence of, well, it's that combination. You talked about that combination of essence and energy being desire and mind, and being energy, and essence being love and beauty, the physical. It's like it immerses itself into the highest reality of what those elements of essence and energy are. But it knows it by experiencing what it isn't.
Yes.
And suffering is the experience of what it isn't, in one word. Is it more than that? Yes.
Yeah.
Is it more than happiness? Yes. They're just two words that basically give us those polar realities.
Yeah. So what I hear you saying is that supreme happiness, as you're using it, is happiness that is beyond the need for juxtaposition against some other state of being. It's really like a state of open acceptance of the reality of each moment, knowing that it is ultimately, fundamentally all God experiencing itself, and that there's no higher calling than to be part of that process, and we might as well do it well.
Yeah, you've summed it up beautifully.
Well, I need to know.
And that's what the cards are telling us how to do that. That's what these people understood, was how it was possible to do that. But in order for that, they had to explain what the world of illusion, and I use that word in the context of our conversation, they had to explain what that looked like. What were the things that caused us to have suffering as our experience? And you were saying, well, what's the relevance for what's happening in the world today? Right now, we're in a world where people are suffering. And I can tell you that we're suffering because people were powerless. We just came out of COVID, and we were made powerless severely, globally, in that situation where we had to be compliant. It was about compliance. We live in a world where status is important. If you've got status, then you have value. But if you have no status, you have no value.
Well, that's what the globalists want you to think, for sure.
Absolutely. And then we've got the lovers. And so if I have acceptance and approval, then I have value. But if nobody loves me, then I don't have any value. I'm a nothing. I'm a cipher. Right. And so we establish our sense of happiness if I've got the right partner, if I have the loving family.
Yeah.
And then we get to the chariot, and that's about success. That's about achievement. If I'm achieving, if I'm proving my worth, if I'm the champion at what I do, then I have value. Now, it's not that being a champion is wrong. It's if you place all your eggs in the basket that establishes my worth or value, then it's a problem. Okay, so you can have a loving relationship, but here's what happens in that place that you were talking about just a moment ago. is that if any of those things are taken away, it doesn't matter. And of course, that's where the world struggles.
Yeah, so you're basically in the model you're proposing through Marseille Tarot and your Lamaniskit model, then the Lovers is really about the pain of the codependency of love. And you're saying the Chariot is a status symbol. Now, that's a very different interpretation than my own way of relating to those cards. To me, the Lover's card is saying that it is ultimately love through which God realizes itself. And love comes in many ways, shapes, forms, and disguises. And this is why Osho says the beauty of love is that it never works. And what he means is, as long as your sense of being loved is dependent upon somebody else's valuation, validation, approval, sexual favors, you're always going to be in a codependent relationship, and you're never growing into an authentic individual that's responsible for loving yourself and creating love within yourself. So the Lover's card is really about coming face to face with the polarities inherent with love, or the force of consciousness, which is the two sphinxes in front of the Chariot in the Rider-Waite deck. And the Chariot, in my conception, is the armor on the charioteer is the realization that I must manage my own mind. And the armor is not to protect me against other people. It's to remind me to be conscious of what I'm creating with my mind. The veil on the top of the Chariot, the four posts representing the four elements, the Chariot has no reins and no rigging, so it means you've got to stay balanced within yourself. The two sphinxes, the two qualities of consciousness, the feminine, the implicate, the darkness, the light, the masculine, the explicate, the created. So the black sphinx is the part of the table, the magician's table you can't see. The white sphinx is the one you can see. And so the Chariot has usually a city behind it, representing that the charioteer needs a sense of commitment to growing as being responsible spiritually to the people, to lead and to guide, which he must do by keeping himself balance-centered and not falling victim to the programming that he's been trying to heal. So these are different conceptions, but they're also, that's the thing about archetypes, is you can use them in lots of ways. I've often quoted Jung. He says, if a picture is worth 1,000 words, then an archetype is worth millions of images. And because archetypes are inherent to the objective psyche, which means these tarot archetypes are actually symbols of what's in all of our minds, not any one of us, all of us. So we're always relating to them. So I just threw that in there because those are slightly different conceptions on those two cards, but I think they're both valid ways of looking at these things.
Yeah, I in my original book, Metanoia, which is the first book I wrote about this, I quoted Sally Nichols at the beginning of my book, and she wrote, the best way to get at the individual meaning of these cards for oneself is to approach them directly as one would the paintings in an art gallery. Like paintings, these trumps are so-called projection holders, meaning simply that they are hooks to catch the imagination. Speaking psychologically, projection is an unconscious autonomous process whereby we first see in the person, objects, and happenings in our environment those tendencies, characteristics, potentials, and shortcomings that really belong to us. We people the exterior world with the witches and princesses, devils and heroes of the drama buried in our own depths.
Yes.
Such a profound, beautiful quote.
It is. She's a deep woman. I really love her writings. And I think, too, that's what the armor on the charioteer is being aware of its own projections.
Well, it's interesting in the Marseille Tarot, he's got on his shoulders palindromes, I think they're called. He's got a man and a woman, and that's on his shoulder guards. And that was part of what used to be in their uniforms or in their armor. And that's the mother and the father. That's the Emperor and the Empress controlling our arms define who we are through what we do. And they're on his shoulder, and they're still controlling, based on their narrative, how he establishes his success or achievement in the world is based on the programming of the parents.
Well, interestingly, the difference there is that in Rider-Waite, on his shoulders is the sun eclipsing the moon, which is the same image that appears in Tarot 18, the moon, which is all about dealing with your shadow and your baggage and doing the healing work to get clear, or you won't make it to the sun, which, we can go into that later. But I personally painted Tarot 7 because my soul gave me that as my archetype for the year, I believe 2022. So I won't go pull it off the wall to show you, but I can email it to you if you want. But the difference being between those two ideologies is that in the Rider-Waite, it's saying you must purify your own projections and your own illusions. And your armor is to remind you that most of what you call an enemy is coming from within yourself. And the spear is a symbol of discernment. You have to have focus and clarity in order to hit something with a spear. So he's holding on to the spear with his right hand, which is the masculine hand, the hand of action. So be clear about what you're doing, because every action is an act of creation.
So it's a very different, because the chariot, and I got to attend the Il Palio, the horse race in Siena, which is what the concept of the chariot during this period emerged from. It was the chariot was the victor's chariot. It was the victor of a battle got to ride the chariot into whatever city had been conquered. Right. And it came as a result. Who got to carry the flag in front of the chariot was the knight who had the fastest race, on a race. So it's quite involved. But in Siena, they've still got a square chariot as part of the Il Palio, and it's exactly the same. It looks exactly the same as the one. Now the baldachin, which is the covering on top of the chariot, represents the point at which we are most removed. So here we have this canopy, which is cutting us off from divine connection. And this is the point where at the chariot we have become, after the Emperor, the Empress, the Pope, the lovers, and now the chariot, we're so far removed from God. We're so distant and cut off from the divine at this point that it's time for us to wake up. In other words, we are so caught up in the illusion with all of these things, and all of a sudden natural justice turns up, or justice turns up. Aging turns up. Old man time. The wheel of fortune turns.
Kronos eats his children.
And so what we have is this situation where we now are being told, and these are cohorts, these are the trump cards, by the way. These three are trumps. They're the key trumps here. They're basically, this is the magician sort of saying, tricked you. You guys thought all of this was real. I'm going to show you that it's not. Let me throw some diabetes in, or let me throw natural justice. Let me throw in some taxation, or let me throw in some other elements. And so all of a sudden, justice is playing out, and a big part of that justice is natural justice. Nobody's punishing you. It's the consequences of your own choices. You've been working long hours, and all of a sudden you're dealing with heart disease and haven't been exercising enough, or whatever's going on. old man time. You know, the hermit is old man time. He's the symbol. It was a very important symbol of the trump cards back in that period, and he represents the end of day. If you have a look, generally the hermit is heading in a left direction, which is west, and west is sundown. It's the end of day. He's got a lantern. He used to be called il tempo, time. And it was the idea that time runs out. And all of a sudden, you've got all of this wealth and status and all of this. What does it mean when you're dead?
A great story. A great story. A new chapter coming. Yeah. No.
And then, of course, the Wheel of Fortune.
I just want to make a point before you go further that in the Marseille deck versus Rider-Waite and many other decks, the number 8 is strength in Rider-Waite, not justice. So 8 and 11 have been switched. And in Angeli's Arian deck, she holds the same formation as the Marseille deck. James Wanless, I think he holds the same formation with Angeli's Arian. But in a lot of decks, 8 is strength, which is about the ego learning to relate to the soul, and then 11 is justice.
Right. Well, in the context of the lemniscate, it makes sense of where they're positioned.
Yeah, it's great. I'm totally digging your approach to it. I love it. I loved it when I read your book. I thought, wow, this is a phenomenal way to relate to tarot, because it takes it completely out of the field of divining and goofing around with cards to really understanding that there's a lot deeper story going on. And I've shared with you in our previous communications that the tarot, if you look at the Law of One by Ra, book 4, Ra, which is the conscious entity that was incarnated as the Egyptian people and built the temples, says they created the tarot major arcana for training their priests. And C.C. Zane is also an expert in Golden Dawn and Rider-Waite, and also claims Egyptian origin and actually shows the same images that is in the Ra book 4. But I think the point being is that these archetypes are far, far deeper than most people realize. And when you look at them in the context of spiritual evolution and what a human being goes through, and if you look at them basis on the structure stages of consciousness, whether you use Ken Wilber's model, Gene Gebser's model, Arthur Young's model, and there's so many models I've studied out there. But really, if you look at the tarot alongside of these models, they're actually showing you the same evolution of consciousness, just in a different structure.
So the magician's world is what we've been talking about there, in the sense that you've got we come into incarnation, parents, Pope, lovers, chariot. They're all about establishing our sense of value in the world, which makes us happy. So these are unsustainable values, and we know they're unsustainable because justice, time, and chance can impact on them. Here's the interesting thing, is that justice, time, and chance cannot impact on sustainable values.
Right. And when you say chance, that's not relating to a card, you're just talking.
That's the Wheel of Fortune.
That's the Wheel of Fortune. Okay.
Yeah. That's the Wheel of Fortune. That's just a simple way of fate, whatever you want to call. But so those three basically only exist in the magician's world. Once you leave the magician's world, once you leave that table, that part of the table of the magician's table, those three don't have any more impact anymore. Right. But they have limited impact. So based on the Marseille Tarot, because there's three legs, the magician still can impact on people as they're going through the dark night of the soul journey, which we'll be talking about in a minute, and going through surrender. You know, those elements of the first part of the transitory journey, the magician can still keep on pulling us back into, and look, all of us that have been on this spiritual journey know this well, where we've got the knowledge, we've got the desire, and we're doing everything that we can. And what happens? The bloody wheel comes off at some stage, and we go back and find ourselves reverting to an old, moment of judgment or anger or frustration, where most of your life you're not doing that anymore. And then all of a sudden something turns up. Well, that's the magician having his impact. And that still keeps on going. But there is a point, and that's the House of God card, which is called the Tower. And the House of God card is the point at which the magician no longer has any input.
And that's normally
the magician
16.
At that point.
Tarot 16. It's 16 in your deck too, right?
Yep. And that's the point at which the magician no longer has any input. He can't influence us at that point moving forward. And so what we have is this situation where all of the things that we thought were sustainable aren't. We're hurting, and that's what the world's going through now. The world is being brought to the crossroad. We've got to that card number 10, and that's the Wheel of Fortune. But through the impact of justice, time, and chance, we've been forced to realize that all the things that we thought were important and sustainable have proven to be unsustainable.
Mm-hmm.
And people are hurting.
So from your perspective, as you're sharing it here, knowing that we're speaking about the reality of the illusion that we're all in the world and what's going on now, are you suggesting that medicine for the journey through this dark night of the soul, the Wheel of Fortune, is to orient ourselves toward timeless values, good, beauty, truth? Those are Platonic values. Are good, beauty, and truth the key ones?
Well, the key values are peace and fulfillment. Fulfillment's probably the word that I most use for happiness. Mm-hmm. That place of fulfillment is happiness. When you're fulfilled, you're happy. Okay, and then there's while we're in our human beingness, then there's beauty. We immerse. So what does beauty look like? It's the food we eat. We eat beautiful food. It tastes beautiful. It smells beautiful. It looks beautiful. We immerse ourselves in beauty. Our homes are beautiful. That doesn't mean that we've got lots of stuff, but there's just a beauty, and we're beautiful. We might have scars and injuries and distortions, but we still find beauty in how we look after ourselves. And then finally, unconditional love. And this is where and that's the whole essence of cards 16, 17, 18, 19, and 20. They're ultimately all about love in all of its different expressions. And it's about now fully immersing your life and devoting your life to love.
Right.
Love of self, love of humanity, and love of the planet.
So I think love has to be an archetype with good, beauty, and truth, because love is ultimately the basis from which those things emerge. Now, I'm going to post a question to you because I know for sure there's going to be comments on the internet when we post this. Someone's going to say, how in the hell can I be happy and focus on good, beauty, truth, and love when I've got vaccine injured, when I thought I was making the safe and effective choice, or I've lost my job, or I can't pay my bills and I'm about to get evicted? There's a lot of people in pain and scared, conversations like this can trigger people like that and make them angry. So how can we take this teaching into the hands of those that need a bridge to get from a lofty philosophical place or a place of relating that only a fairly enlightened person can get to, knowing the reality of a lot of people's lives in the world right now?
I'm going to make a reference to a Christian scripture, and I think it's quite pertinent to your question. And I think it's probably one of two or three what I think are the most important scriptures in the Bible, in the New Testament in particular. And this is out of Matthew 13:15. And Jesus said, if you can see with your eyes and hear with your ears and understand with your heart and be converted, not to Christianity, be converted to what he just talked about, and this isn't Jesus, this is infinite consciousness, I will heal you.
Right.
So in other words, what we have is this formula for healing. Mm-hmm. If I can see with my eyes and hear with my ears is the first one. And what is that? Being aware.
Yep.
It is as simple as being aware. So that's why my program, Pathways to Mindfulness, and I work with people with that program for anywhere up to 10 months, 12 months sometimes with people, teaching them just how to be aware.
Yes.
Teaching people how to just stop and be the observer. So I'm going to give people a really simple tool right now that they can use. And that is become an expert at using full stops. Mm-hmm. Drop your commas and use full stops. And what does that mean? Observe the facts of what's going on and use a full stop. I don't have the ability to pay for my rent. Full stop. The consequence of not paying for my rent is eviction. Yes. Full stop. So in other words, don't deny the reality in terms of what's going on. State the facts, but use full stops. Where we go wrong is that we put in a comma and then we embellish the facts with a whole lot of narrative, which invariably comes from our programming. Mm-hmm. And so what happens is that now we take it into a place that causes suffering. When you stay in the place of that which observes, it doesn't feel anything. Mm-hmm. So when you stay the observer of the fact, so you're still honoring even your emotion, you can state the observation of the fact of what you're feeling when you embrace the experience. That's a fact. I'm feeling discombobulated at this moment. I use that word loosely. That's a fact, full stop. That which is in the place of observing doesn't have thoughts, feelings, desires, or hopes or expectations. All it's doing is observing. Jesus said, if you can see with your eyes and hear with your ears. Okay, so that's the first part of it, is to be able to become the witness by using full stops. Mm-hmm.
So you can detach from
that. Absolutely, you automatically come to a place of peace.
And you mean
that's a place of peace.
What I'm hearing you say is to use full periods. We call them periods, because if you use a comma, then you're continuing to be trapped in the narrative. The sentence keeps going, so you're exaggerating the story.
So now you've stepped away from just being the observer and you're giving it meaning.
Yeah,
and the only meaning you can give it is from your narrative.
Right. Yeah.
And what's your narrative given you all of your life? Suffering.
Yeah. You could also say instead of giving it meaning, you're giving it weight.
Yes, that's another way of
Inertia.
describing it. Yeah. And then the next one is understand with your heart, and that is how can I bring love into this moment? In other words, what can I do that's going to be loving for me and loving for others in this moment? How can I foster that sense of love? Now, why is that important? We'll come back to how you do that, but why is that important? Because the nature of the divine is love.
Yes.
And when you align yourself with love, you actually invite the manifestation of the divine into your moment, into your experience. And the word I used for that before is grace. And so all of a sudden, grace opens a door that you have no idea was even possible in that place. Now, you don't sit there waiting for grace to open the door. Your energy is staying focused on being the observer and immersing consciousness in love. How can I serve or help my neighbor? What can I do in this moment to be aware of being loving to myself in this moment? How can I be loving to myself in this moment? In terms of what could I do to go and have it? If all I can have is a cold drink of water, then go and take a nice glass of water and sit and just watch the moon or watch the stars or, do something loving to myself in this moment. But where's the opportunity to be loving to somebody else in this moment? In other words, commit yourself to embracing love as your state of being. And in that moment, you invite grace. See, grace is always trying to manifest. That's the nature of the divine. Yeah. It's always wanting to provide abundance. The only thing that stops us is our narrative. And so in that moment, we're actually qualifying to have grace then manifest in our reality. And I can tell you story after story of people's lives who have had miracles, and that's when miracles happen. We use the word miracles because we just don't understand the nature of grace.
Yeah. Well, there's an old saying, a miracle is something you just don't understand.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And of course, that's, and I live in a rainforest and I watch grace always just doing what it does in the most profound and amazing way. It knows nothing but abundance. I get to see it in the beauty of this forest. And it's like we live in a forest of consciousness and being that is doing that all the time. It's only us that's cutting ourselves off from that. So for people who are really experiencing these things, there is no other answer other than the fact that there is no magical, sort of cure other than what I just talked about there. And that's about coming to that place of seeing with your eyes, hearing with your ears, and understanding with your heart. In that place, you instantly will have peace.
Enzymes are one of the most important things we can use to supplement our diet. Very few people have normal levels of digestive enzymes. It's extremely common to be digestive enzyme deficient because so many people are eating cooked foods, processed foods, packaged foods, etc. The best digestive enzymes I've ever found are masszymes by Bioptimizers. And one of the things I like about them is not only are they the most advanced technology for how they're produced, the science behind them, but I take them on an empty stomach every morning and every night as proteolytic enzymes to help clean my body. So I've got Wade here, who's the formulator of these enzymes, to tell us how do they work as digestive and proteolytic enzymes, because today I think we really need to be supplementing with high quality enzymes. So Wade, what's unique about masszymes?
Well, one of the interesting things is undigested protein is one of the biggest contaminants that cause problem for people, whether it's in their blood or inflammatory conditions or even impairing recovery. And it's quite common amongst athletes who have high protein diets, interesting enough, who are looking to add recovery, but they're not breaking down their protein effectively. And that was my case way back in the day as a former bodybuilding champion. So we set about cultivating and developing an enzyme formulation that handled all of the amino acids in a pH range from 2 to 12, as well as providing an assortment of assistant enzymes. In other words, it doesn't just break down protein, it handles carbohydrates, it handles fats, it handles fibers, a variety of different things, and they work synergistically together to make sure that you can break down just about any food and digest it properly. Now, when you talk about the difference between enzymes, there's digestive enzymes and systemic enzymes. Systemic enzymes such as like nattokinase or serrapeptase. Well, they don't help break down digestion, but they can break down inflammation or inflammatory conditions, undigested proteins, or scarring tissue inside the body. Well, it turns out when you take masszymes on an empty stomach, it works exactly the same way. It will go into the bloodstream and now works as a systemic enzyme, reducing inflammation, accelerating recovery times. Matt just tore his Achilles tendon and made a full recovery after surgery within a few weeks, which they expected for many months. He was taking as many as 100 a day. Now, I'm not suggesting people do that, but this was an extreme condition. And the bottom line is masszymes is great for recovery, for cleaning up undigested proteins in the system, as well for digesting just about any meal. If this isn't the best digestive enzyme or systemic enzyme that you've ever taken, you get your money back. That's the Bioptimizer guarantee.
Right now, you can get a bottle of masszymes for free. All you need to do is pay a small shipping fee, and there's no catch. There's no tricks, no forced continuity, nothing to cancel. They are so confident in their products that they offer a 365-day money-back guarantee, so I'm positive you'll be satisfied with the results. So I strongly suggest you head over to the Bioptimizer's website and grab your bottle before they either run out or take this offer away.
You can try Bioptimizer's masszymes at bioptimizers.com/living4D and get 10% off using the code Paul10. That's bioptimizers.com/living, the number 4 and the letter D, and the code is Paul10. Plus, Bioptimizers always have great bonuses and offers when you purchase multiple bottles. So make sure you check them out at bioptimizers.com/living4D and use the promo code Paul10 for your 10% discount.
Yeah, it's a tough transition. It's, but I think that's the fact that it's a tough transition points directly to the importance of legitimate spiritual development, because if you don't have the awareness of what's possible and the tools for navigating challenging situations that allow you to maintain a sense of sovereignty and freedom within yourself, then you will identify yourself with the situation and you will fall into the pain of your own judgment of self and other. And so you ultimately end up just spinning on that wheel of fortune or the wheel of samsara over and over and over again. And you could call that every day, just the sun and the revolution of the earth. It looks to us like the sun's going around, but you think of the earth as a wheel rotating, and you can use any time scale you want to from lifetime to lifetime, because we go to bed at night, we have a mini death, and we wake up and have a mini birth every day. So I think if we work with that concept, it's as though God or Source set it up so that we have a microcosm of the macrocosm, and we can practice each day for the bigger death of the life, and that scale could go all the way up through a universe.
Look, the beauty of what the cards show, and I just love just how magical these images are. when we look at the Wheel of Fortune, normally it's a clockwise rotating wheel, and typically you've got the character at
Anubis.
the top.
I think it's called Anubis.
Right. Regno, regnabe, these were the words. I will reign, I have reigned. And down the bottom was the character, I have no kingdom. That was the traditional names of the characters on the original Wheel of Fortune. So the Wheel of Fortune, I will reign, I have reigned, I have no kingdom. Here's what's interesting. Is that the Wheel of Fortune in the Marseille Tarot, the wheel turns anti-clockwise. It goes Wiederschieds, which was, first of all, was evil in the Catholic Church. Nothing went anti-clockwise. And there's no character at the bottom. So what was the name of the character at the bottom?
Anubis.
I have no kingdom. I have no kingdom. If he's not there, it means that if you go anti-clockwise, there must be a kingdom.
Mm.
Well, guess what happens when you go into the other side of the lemniscate? When we're looking at the lemniscate, on the left side you're going clockwise in the world of illusion, as I call it. Now, as you come back the other side, guess what happens? It goes anti-clockwise.
Yeah, because it's
And what that says is if you go anti-clockwise, you will find the kingdom, because the bottom character is missing off that wheel. In the classic Marseille Tarot, there's only 3 characters in the wheel going anti-clockwise. And so now in these cards, now we find the Strength card, and as the Magician was the billboard to the world of illusion, and I use that loosely based on the context of our conversation, the Strength card is the billboard in moving into the kingdom of God. And she's saying, if you go down this route, you're going to find the crown of glory. So we see the zigzag of effulgence on her head. She's got a golden crown on her head.
Yeah,
which sits on top of her hat.
And in Rider Waite, she's got the infinity symbol, or the laminiskit, directly above her head. And
she's holding open the mouth of the lion that says, this is going to be as scary as shit, excuse the French. She's saying, you're going to need the courage of a refined woman. In other words, this isn't Hercules. This isn't about physical strength. This is courage that comes from within that's going to require you. And of course, we then come to the first card after that, which is the Hanged Man. Okay, so the Hanged Man is what we all get to when justice, time, and chance, the Wheel of Fortune, have had their way with us. Everything's been taken away from us. And so in a lot of the classic Marseille Tarot, the Hanged Man, and here's an example of the Hanged Man, notice all the trees that are supporting him have been pruned. That's the pruning of justice, time, and chance. Everything's been cut away. Okay. And so what we have is this situation where we're sitting there and we don't have anywhere to live. We don't have anything to eat. Everything's been taken away. It's all been stripped away. And so the creators of these cards understood very well that this was the point that people had to get to in order to move into the kingdom of heaven. Now, I'm going to sort of elaborate a little bit in terms of justifying my rationale for these cards and where they came from, because this is important here. This particular card, based on my rationale, relates to the first beatitude from the Sermon on the Mount, which is blessed are the poor in spirit. So this is the point at which somebody's spirit has been broken. And what's the sequence to blessed are the poor in spirit? For theirs is the kingdom of heaven. So basically what this card is saying, if you've got to this point here for the first time, you have a real crack at finding the kingdom of heaven. Okay, so what's the Beatitudes got to do with all of this? So bear with me for a moment, and I had a brief chat with you about this previously. A big part of my rationale in my book was that these cards were inspired by the Cathar. And for those of you who don't know, the Cathar in our modern language was a religion that emerged in southern France primarily during the end of the 11th, but going into the 12th century. And they were deemed to be heretical. And over a period of from 1209 to 1229, Pope Innocent III commissioned the Albigensian Crusade, where he systematically went through southern France and in some cases wiped out whole villages, killed every man, child, woman in villages in southern France to get rid of this religion. And then they couldn't sustain the crusade, so they went to the Inquisition. And the Inquisition then, once again, systematically went through Italy and all sorts of places. The Spanish Inquisition was different. It focused on Jews and Moors, whereas the French Inquisition and Italian Inquisition was more about heretics and as it related to these Cathar-based religions. And by 1360, the Cathars were pretty well wiped out. They had just about disappeared. They would have been about. They just would have been well and truly hidden by this stage. But any sort of evidence of the Cathars would have been wiped out. My particular recent graceful awakening, and it was a moment of grace that awakened me, was to the whole notion that in fact Catharism wasn't a religion. It was an approach to Christianity that existed prior to certainly prior to the Great Schism that happened in 1054, I think it was, where the East and the West of Christianity separated, and you ended up with the Greek Orthodox and several other Orthodox religions in the East now being separated from the Catholic Church in the West. And they became two different approaches to Christianity. Interestingly enough, Orthodoxy subscribed to this hesychasm, which is this notion of developing stillness and silence and developing this sense of illumination of becoming one with God, or having this God experience, divine experience, which, by the way, is the moon card, and we'll talk about that a little bit later on. The core teaching of hesychasm was called theosis, and theosis was a three-step process. The first step was purification. So you went through a purifying. The second step was illumination, where you saw the light. And then the third step was unification, which is oneness with God. Okay. The word that the Orthodoxy used for the purification was called catharsis. That's the name. That's what catharsis means, is purification. Theoria was the name for illumination, and theosis was the name for unification. So what we had was all of these Orthodox Christians were practicing catharsis as a part of their spiritual tradition. They were trying to purify themselves. Yeah. And they did that through going through the dark night of the soul and through surrender. Those were the two key elements of purification. They didn't know anything else. That was their Christianity, was going through catharsis. They were devoted and committed to that. They still did everything else that Christians did, but they were involved in this. They became known as the good Christians, the bon homme and bonne femme. They were the good men and women, or the good Christians, because of their commitment to purification, they were living a Christianity that was more righteous, is the word I'm going to use, than traditional Christians. Well, as a result of the schism, the Catholic Church denied hesychasm, and it decided that it didn't want to have that as part of their tradition. So they basically went through and banned it. as part of the Western Christian approach. And about 80 years after the schism is the first time we see the word Cathar emerge. And it's my theory that, in fact, this was a name that was given to Christians who were practicing catharsis. It wasn't a religion. It was people who were still aligning themselves with Eastern Orthodoxy and theosis, and they were devoting their lives. So the church systematically went through and tried to educate people about not practicing theosis and catharsis. But it seems that the Languedoc region of southern France didn't get that message for some reason. And they talk about the fact that that was a part of what went on. They realised that part had not been properly dealt with. So what we had was situations, and this is what happened in Albi. In Albi, which is a city in the north part of the Languedoc of southern France, it seems that there was an archbishop there who was in charge of the church.
I lost you for a second there. You said the north part of Languedoc?
Languedoc, the language of Doc. Okay, so it's in southern France, was in the north part. It seems that there were archbishops who subscribed to catharsis. They weren't Cathars. It wasn't like there were Cathars in the cathedral at Albi. There were Christians who were Catholic who were practicing catharsis, and that was recognised. And so what they did was they systematically went through Languedoc and got rid of, I know that for a fact that based on history, the Innocent III got rid of a whole lot of archbishops and leaders in the church because of that very reason. They were aligned with catharsis, and they got rid of them and replaced them with what we would call traditional Catholic leaders. And then they systematically went through and tried to get rid of the Cathar, who were these people practicing catharsis. And so we have these wonderful, horrible stories. In Béziers, for example, the crusade, the Albigensian from Albigensian crusade made its way into Béziers. And when they went in, the soldiers said, we can't differentiate between who's a Cathar or practicing catharsis and who's a Catholic. And Armud, who was the head of the crusade, he said, go in and kill them all. God knows his own. Okay.
Nice.
And so they literally wiped out whole villages based on getting rid of these people who were living catharsis. So what we ended up with was a group of people. Eventually, after 130 years of Inquisition, we ended up with people living together in communities who were practicing catharsis. And they became known as Cathars, and they sort of became identified as a religion.
And catharsis is the purification, right?
Is the purification. Yeah. And so what ends up happening is when the church starts to, or not the church, but Catharism starts to disappear in 1360, and this is in Milan in northern Italy, playing cards make their way into northern Italy around 1360, 1370. For the first time, playing cards are introduced. And somebody obviously and we know that the Sforza and the Visconti family were involved in this, but somebody got the bright idea of, let's take this theology of catharsis and put it into portable stained glass windows, which are playing cards, because it was an easy way to educate and to
hide,
keep the information.
Hide in plain
and
sight.
Eventually, that's it, hide in plain sight. And eventually those cards were joined to playing cards to create a new game called Il Trionfi, which was called the Triumphs. And so long before tarot cards were ever used for divining, and that wasn't until we get to the late 1600s, early 1700s, that it becomes a divination tool. So we're talking nearly 200 years. It's being used as a card game.
Yeah.
Called Il Trionfi. But within that is this deeply profound sacred mystery.
And it's very in line with what the alchemists had to do to avoid persecution by the Catholic Church And that's why you see all these strange images in alchemy, lions and dragons and kings and queens that are married at the chest, and, various scientific looking ovens and instruments. And, to the average person, if you don't know the language, it took Jung 10 years working with Marie-Louise von Franz, his assistant, who had a degree in ancient languages, to decode the symbolism, to ultimately come to the conclusion that alchemy was really a system of progressive purification and spiritual evolution. And Jung's writings are full of all that stuff, and I've studied him quite a lot in my life because it's a lot to study. Yeah. But it's really like a parallel story. The Cathars and the alchemists were really dealing with the same forces and also practicing the same things, just under different names.
Yeah. So then we've got this situation where I make this claim that the Beatitudes, which is a series of 8 statements, and there's some conjecture whether originally it was 7 or 8, but what we've got is these 8 statements that basically describe the journey of theosis. And so the word beatitude means blessed, and it comes from beatus, the word beatus and facare. So it was originally called beatificare, and beatus means supreme happiness. It literally means supreme happiness. And care facare means to make. So the Beatitudes literally meant to make supremely happy. Mm-hmm. That's what the word blessed is about, to make happy. And so what these guys had was these 7 statements, and they transposed them into cards. So the first beatitude is blessed are the poor in spirit. So he's hanging upside down. He's lost everything. It's all been cut away. Now, in this place, we have one of two. Well, in that place where everything's taken away, we come to a crossroad. And I said this before. And the crossroad is we can mark time. And that's what the biggest majority of human beings are doing. They're watching TV, they're on their telephones, they're eating shit food, they're on drugs, recreational, medicinal. They're doing whatever they can just to survive each day. And they're numb. They're numb to their core spiritual being, their soul being. They just turn up. And if it gets bad enough, then one option is suicide. That's going back up towards the card up on the top right next to the world card. When you look at the lemniscate, is the judgment card. What you've got is a grave site, so that's suicide. Some people have got the energy to come back and recreate the illusion again. So they'll find a new partner, or they'll get a new job, or go and live somewhere else, and they try to redo it all. Instead of it taking 20 or 30 years to get to this painful place, they'll be back there in 5 years or 10 years in the recreation of it. And then the other option is the dark night of the soul. Now, there's a difference between the dark night of the soul and the dark night of the senses. There's lots of people who have said, I've had a dark night of the soul, but it didn't take them into theosis. Where it took them to was, I'll have another go at doing it again, or I'll numb it, or I'll commit suicide. What happens is that a dark night of the senses, people won't go into the dark night of the soul. It's too scary for them, or they don't know, and so they stay on the outside and they don't enter. The dark night of the soul is when you say, I've hurt enough, I don't want this anymore, I'm just prepared to just let it all go. And that's basically what he's doing, is he's let everything's been cut away. Now, the Emperor had his leg in the shape of the 4. Now, you talk about the 4, and this is where I see the 4 differently. He had his shape in the leg in the shape of the 4, which is talking about the whole idea of the 4 aspects of unsustainable values. Now, the 4's been turned upside down. And so those values are now being emptied out. And so this is about letting go of those values. And this is a 4-step process of transformation. 2 steps are associated with the dark night of the soul, and 2 steps are associated with surrender, which is part of this process. So he's basically let go of everything that was tied up with the world of illusion. Okay, wealth, power, love, and success. Special relationships, need to achieve, the need for status, all of those things. It's Justice, Time and Chance have done a great job. And this is a situation where we are hurting. We are grieving. And this is about being able to use full stops. The only thing that you can do in this place is to put full stops in. There's nothing else you can do. You can't go anywhere. And he's tied by a rope to a crossbar, and that's his grief. His grief is evidence that he still has some attachment to the things that he's lost.
Yes.
Okay, at this point here. But this is the place of all you can do. Now, he's in air. He's hanging in air. And this is the first of the 4 elements that are being recalibrated. The next card is the Death card, which is the element of earth. The Temperance card, she's pouring water, which is the element of water. And the Devil card, he has a flaming sword, which is the element of fire. So we're recalibrating consciousness. And so this is a recalibration of the mind.
Yes.
And this is the point at which you have to become aware of your mind. This is where the full stop starts to come in. Because what happens is if you don't become aware of the mind gets you carried away.
Or
and it'll take you away from here.
You can go back into the stuff you described earlier.
Right. And so this is a full stop. You can't go anywhere. You're hanging upside down. His arms are tied. You are in a position where you can't go anywhere. And that's what the full stop is. You don't go anywhere. You just become the observer of the facts.
Yeah.
And that's how you bring the element of air into awareness at this point. Okay? Yeah. So the next beatitude is blessed are those that mourn. Okay, so blessed are those that mourn, for they shall be comforted. Okay, so what is mourning? Mourning is an externalization of our grief. So grief is something that's in our mind and something that we experience deep within us. But now we're coming to the place where we are externalizing our grief so that we can observe it. And you'll notice his head is all about observation. Yep. He's becoming the observer of the grief. And what this card is saying, at the point at which you become that which observes, which is the act of mourning. You know, so in Italy, men used to do the mourning, and they said that it wasn't appropriate, so they made it illegal for men to do mourning, and women did it, and they were professional mourners. And what they were doing was professional mourners were giving people the external expression of their grief so that they could become the witness of their grief. And what this is saying is, at that point, you can sever your attachment to wealth, power, love, and success. And we will see a king or a hand or all different elements of what we had in those earlier components. And so that's severing our attachment now. So grief is attachment through becoming that which mourns, which is the mechanism of truly observing the grief. Now we sever our attachment to the things that we were attached to. And what do we experience? Blessed are those that mourn, for they shall be comforted. And so in that moment, you're able to find a place of comfort.
Yeah. It's a very deep process. And I think you can almost tell where a person's at in their own spiritual maturity by how they react to concepts like this. If you've had enough life experience to go through a real, call it midlife crisis, dark night of the soul, and you've realized you've got to face the mirror, and you know that all the drugs and all the doctors, it's ultimately not getting to anything but the symptoms of it all. You know, when you realize you're the one that hung yourself, so to speak, and only you can make that transition into freedom. Arthur Young calls that the choice point in our life, where we either decide to simplify our life and orient ourselves towards what you would call the eternal values, or suffer the consequences of staying identified with our material possessions and titles and rank, etc. So, you know, even as a therapist, it doesn't matter how well I understand the process. I can explain this to somebody going through that process, but if they're too immature spiritually, they don't have any interest in hearing that. They want what drug will get rid of my pain, you know. And this is where you see the man sells his business, goes out and buys a Corvette and gets a 25-year-old girlfriend. And that's really, you know, jumping back on the wheel and going backwards in the flow instead of going forwards.
Well, my Pathways to Mindfulness program, and there's references to that in the notes, it's really walking people through these two steps here. Literally what I do is I walk people through very gently becoming the observer and becoming the mourner, through a process of teach them how to be mindful of practicing awareness. And I can tell you the amount of shift that brings. It doesn't happen overnight. In other words, I can't do that with people over, maybe a rare person. I could do it in a week or 8 weeks. But most people, that's a journey of 6 months.
Oh yeah, no
10
question.
months.
Yeah.
For me to guide people, but I have a really lovely process where I work people through a very gentle process of becoming the observer and how to practice awareness as a way of life. And that's literally, and because we don't have people seeing these images, the hanged man is a character hanging upside down, hanging from a lanyard, basically, or what's the name of
like
that?
An archway.
But anyway, archway, yeah, that's made up of trees that have been pruned, and he's hanging in air. And then the death card is a skeletal style figure with a scythe, and there's all these bits of bodies in the ground, and he's sort of got this head with a very intense eye look, and he's looking. It's about awareness. And so. Just that alone, that process itself, everybody has to go through it. I'm sorry, I don't care who you are, but every single human being will have to go through that process, whether it's what I do or what other people offer as their way of taking people through that dark night of the soul experience. But we lack what I think are people who have that deep understanding and ownership of being guided through the dark night of the soul in our society.
Yeah, and that's a problem, because that when you don't have the support like you offer in your program, then the only option you have is what do people do when they're in pain? They run to medical doctors, they get drugged up. Fortunately, there are enough alternative therapists and depth psychologists and Jungian analysts, which are depth psychologists. I mean, there are people out there, but most people don't even know where to look for them, you know? So if you don't get graced with someone who knows who to send you to, in all fairness to people, you can find yourself caught in the jaws of the machine that makes people unconscious. No matter how much pain you're in. And then your pain just drives you deeper into the rabbit hole. And, you know, and this is where suicide starts to become more popular. And look, since COVID, the suicide levels have gone through the roof because people were put into a situation where they were revoked and it was denied to do things that we know are remedies for these kinds of challenges, problems, and crises. And when you can't go see people because unfortunately you're too gullible and believe mandates are laws, which they're not. But this is the challenge of not having a structure of elders and wise men and women like a tribal society did, so that the knowledge of the elders filters down to the younger people to say, oh, look, this is how you make it through that. And so that's one of the I think the reasons that we have as much crisis in the world as we do is because we don't have the elders to say, use a period or a full stop and not a comma there. Don't listen to this expert on television because they're not telling you the truth. But that's what my podcast is for, really, is to say, let's look at this from a deeper, more spiritual perspective so that we know that we do have options and we do have tools that we can use. And it's important because any one of us that does it knows that the process is viable and real and works and can share that with other people. And I think that's really my dream for all the Chek professionals around the world, is to be living examples of how to heal and how to, get clear on what your values are and all the things that we've been working around in this dialogue here, which is, it's all very, very important. Hi, everybody. My family and I love Organifi's green juices. You can get your green juice in 2 excellent flavors, crisp apple and original mint. Not only are these products made with certified organic ingredients to support your family's nutritional needs, they each have some unique benefits. Your green juice crisp apple eases stress with an effective dose of 600 milligrams of ashwagandha per serving. Helps reduce cortisol spikes that increase snacking urges and aids keeping your blood sugar balanced. Why snack on inferior foods that lack nutrition and often lead to blood sugar spikes followed by blood sugar crashes when Organifi's green juices are super healthy, taste great, and are as quick to make as opening the package and adding water. Your green juice crisp apple is made from fresh apples picked right off the branch and are packed with micronutrients to support your body's needs. Green juice original mint contains ashwagandha, chlorella, and spirulina. Reset your body every morning with 11 detoxifying superfoods. You'll love the delicious taste and your body will feel strong and stable with all the micronutrients in each serving. Green juice original mint promotes balanced cortisol and stress levels, perfect for weight management, and helps rid the body of harmful toxins. Personally, I'm super grateful that Organifi makes such excellent, easy-to-use drinks and foods that keep us energized, healthy, and clean inside while decreasing the urge to crave on inferior snack foods. My kids love both flavors, and I love knowing that we can all be healthy together with Organifi's excellent crisp apple and original mint green juices. These products are excellent for work, on the road, sharing with friends, and anytime you need a nutritious boost that tastes good. To get your crisp apple and original mint green juices, go to organifi.com/Chek20. That's Organifi.com/Chek20. Save 20% on your purchase using the code Chek20, all caps, on checkout. Don't worry if you forget your Living 4D discount code, because you'll see it right there on the landing page. Enjoy Organifi's excellent green juices. Okay, so we've covered a lot, Russell, and I know we're not done yet. So this is all very, very interesting and important and deep and profound and honest. And I want to make a point, though, for a few listeners that might have this question in their head. And that is that as we've been sharing throughout the conversation, some of the tarot decks are different. But one of the things that I get asked a lot when I teach my tarot workshops is, Paul, how come this deck has this card at this number and this one has it at another number, and how can it be real if they're all different? So I want to make the point that they're archetypes, and that whatever deck you're using with whatever intention, your psyche will draw you to the cards that carry that meaning. So it doesn't matter what the deck orientation is, it's what you choose, and that is a language that your psyche uses to communicate with you. So you can actually get the same advice through different card decks, and you might find that even though the numbers are different, that the advice ultimately coming to you is what you need. So I just wanted to bring that up, because a lot of people will be so rational and logical about it, they'll dismiss it because of the differences. But that's the nature of an archetype, and that it's your psyche that is assigning the meaning to it.
And the beauty about, see, this is the Beatitudes. You can pick up Matthew chapter 5 and read the Beatitudes. And for most people, it means diddly squat. But all of a sudden, when you've got these images with this deep symbolism involved, all of a sudden the Beatitudes come alive. That's what was so profound about even iconography within cathedrals and that. What was so profound was that the images spoke at another whole level to people. That's why they had cathedrals with these amazing symbols and art and the alchemists, why they had all these images, and because it spoke to the soul, it spoke at such another level.
I'll just add to that, Russell, that's a very important point, because these things, symbols act on your unconscious, whether you're conscious of it or not. So these images are like seeds that get planted in your psyche and they grow. So there's a lot of things, like we're talking about a process of life that everyone can associate to if they've made it far enough along. Like a 20-year-old probably got lost at the first, at the Emperor card, because that's where they're at. The Emperor, the Pope, that's where they're at. But someone who's 50 will be saying, oh my God, they're talking about me right now. Someone who's 60 will saying, oh yes, this is really true. And someone who's 70 will say, oh my God, now I know why I'm still in pain, or thank God I went through this catharsis process, simplified my life and oriented myself to eternal values instead of, status symbols. So I think that's why this is, but I wanted to make the point for everyone listening that everything that we've covered and a lot more is in Russell's book, The Spiritual Roots of the Tarot. And he explains a lot of this stuff in chapters with great depth, including the Beatitudes, the Cathars, the images. So I think I can't encourage you enough, if you have any interest in tarot and the life process at all, and a deeper look at Christianity too, and a more wholesome look at it, and an honest, there's many times where you're honest about, what I call corporate religion versus the real religion. And the Cathars are a great example of real religion versus corporate religion. I think that Russell's book is a very important read. And as I stated in the first podcast, when I started reading it, I couldn't put the damn thing down. I mean, it was just like, I had to get to the next level of the story, because there was a clear story unfolding. And because I had enough life experience and enough experience as a therapist to see everything you were talking about from a lot of personal experience clinically and in my own life, I thought, okay, well, this story that's evolving here is something so real that the guy that wrote this book can't have written the book unless he himself has been through this story, or he would not know how to convey it. And so I think that's one of the things that I want to encourage people to do, is if this is interesting and touching you, then get the book and consider getting into Russell's programs, or any one of them. The mindfulness program is excellent. We talked about that in the first podcast. I think your approach to mindfulness is Absolutely excellent. It's much more practical and easier to apply than a lot of the stuff going around today.
And the new one that I'm doing now, which is called the Map for Transcendence, which is in the notes as well. That's where I actually take people through what we've been talking about today. But we're talking about it. What I'll be doing is working with people and taking them through it. And that could take a year to go. You know, we have 16 sessions in that, but I don't do them week after week. I do it as you engage it and incorporate it and integrate it into your being. And that could take weeks, for us months, for us to take you through that process. So, you know, you can go to my website, and that's all in the notes there, that they'll be able to follow that through if that's something that they want to do.
Well, not only that, I'd like to say that for a lot of people hearing, oh my God, it's weeks and months, they see that as a distraction. But the process of catharsis is not something you want to rush. Like, you don't want to go to your local herbologist and say, give me every form of cleanse you have at once, because I want to get this over quick, because the process could kill you. You've got to be able to digest this and metabolize it and assimilate it. And, you know, like, if you just think of what it takes to really heal a divorce, that can take a couple of years to 5 years to really do the catharsis of a divorce. But we're talking about the entire life process here. So I just wanted to share that at this point in the conversation, so people have some context and some understanding and some resources and more of why we're talking about this process in this extended format, so that people can stay with this conversation long enough that it's not just another, you know, thing that they forget about, because we're talking about what's happening in you no matter who you are.
So let's just finish up this dark night of the soul part of it, and then we'll just talk about where it goes from there, just very briefly, because I think right at the beginning, you said, what's the context for this, for what people are dealing with now? And what we're talking about is the context for how people can deal with what they're dealing with now. And that's about shifting values from worldly values to love and peace and joy as a way of being and beauty, as opposed to these other things. And it's not that the others are not there, because the nature of abundance, the nature of grace is abundance, and those things still unfold, but we've still got to get there. We've still got to get to the place where we can have that be our reality. Real quickly, the next card it shows an angel. It's a woman with wings, and she's pouring water between two vessels, and she has a flower on her forehead. This is temperance. And this is tied up with the third beatitude, which says, blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Meekness and humility are much the same, and humble comes from the word humus, which means earth. And basically it means that we are prostrate on the ground and we are emptied out. Our vessel is empty and we're now ready for it to be filled. We have such a lovely expression in our modern spiritual language: when the student is ready, the teacher appears. And literally that's what happens here, is at this point, when we're in this place of being teachable and we're on the ground, prostrate, ready to receive, then the teacher appears, and that's Holy Spirit, the Holy Spirit of wisdom, which in the medieval tradition, the Holy Spirit of wisdom was a female spiritual energy that brought knowledge and wisdom at that deeper spiritual level. So what happens is the learning then begins, and you start to be given new understanding and insights in terms of what's needed to live a life based on spiritual values. Here's what's interesting. Her flower is a red rose. And that's different to a white rose. A white rose symbolized the virgin. The red rose says that virginity has been lost. There has been conception. And this is the point at which Christ, because eventually the virgin gives birth to the Christ being divine consciousness in our human beingness, this is the point at which Christ consciousness has been conceived. So the conception has now taken place at this point here. And surrender in this context is temperance, and they use the word temperance. Well, what does that mean? You constrain yourself from reverting back to your old habits. So you actually now have to exercise some will at this point not to go back to doing the things that you used to do.
Yeah.
Okay. And so you have to demonstrate temperance at this point, which is part of the surrender. And it's what allows you to stay teachable.
Yes.
Okay. Moving on quickly then the next one is the devil card. And this is a really significant one. So here we see this devil-like figure, and there's two humans with, they've all got horns on them that are attached to an anvil, and the devil's standing on the anvil, and he's got two hands. His right hand is up open in the air, and the left hand's holding a flaming sword, what's called a flaming sword. And these are really important because this is mind and desire. What did you tell us about mind and desire earlier, Paul, in terms of what they represented, as opposed to love and physical?
Well, mind is the flow of energy and information. Is an embodied and relational process that regulates the flow of energy and information. But mind is based in love and relationship. Desire is, two kinds of desire. Divine desire is the source of the dream itself. And then desire for things is what Buddha said keeps you on the wheel of samsara.
So what we're dealing with here is the elements of energy as it relates. And so the open hand is the element of air. The hand is open in air, which means that we're not grasping onto thoughts. Now, we have completely let go of our thinking by becoming the observer. And the other thing that we're doing, the flaming sword, is what I call the Abrahamic test. So this is the point where Abraham's narrative was about abandonment by his father. And so his narrative was about not having connection, children not having connection with parents. So guess what he created for himself? An absence of children. Even to the point where God said, we know that this is his narrative. God said, I'm going to give you more children than there are grains of sand on the beach and stars in the sky. And so what happens is Abraham takes his nephew with him, so he borrows a child, and that doesn't work out. He ends up having a child, Ishmael, to his wife's handmaiden, and that kind of works out but doesn't. And then he has Isaac. He's 100 years old, and he finally has his first child. Yeah. And so now his narrative plays in because his whole story is about abandonment. And what does God do?
Abandons him.
I need to know that you aren't attached to your narrative, that you love me more than you love Isaac. I want you to take Isaac up into the mountain, and I want you to cut his throat, which is a sword, and burn him, which is the flame. That's the flaming sword. Every one of us is going to have to sacrifice our 7-year-old narrative. Right. And so that's letting go of our desire for happiness based on what we were programmed to believe is how we were happy. So the only way that we can move into, and that's where illumination takes us, is by letting go of our thinking, our programming in our thinking, and our narrative or our desires based on our programming. Only by sacrificing those and letting them go can we make the next move, which is into illumination.
Yes. Just another symbolic significance. The flaming sword cross-culturally also is a symbol for discernment. And so you're talking about the devil card. There's a lot of things we have to discern at that level. What is and isn't producing enduring happiness? What is and isn't good? What is and isn't beautiful? What is and isn't true, which is really the theme of the last several years. What is and isn't true? I'll show you if I can get it. Here is the Buddhist god Manjushri, and there's her flaming sword in her hand. And she is the god of discernment in Buddhism. And so she sits on my desk to remind me that my job as a therapist and coach and teacher is to be conscious of my task of discerning what should and shouldn't be taught and what my responsibilities are and everything that I have to constantly remind myself of for all the reasons that we're discussing here. But anyhow, I just wanted to bring that up because, as you know, symbols have lots of meanings, but if you look at how they apply in each of these archetypes, then you can get a depth of understanding that you wouldn't if you didn't understand the symbology of them.
That's right. That's what, and of course, the flaming sword in this context is one of the 2 tests for getting back into the kingdom of heaven.
Well, if you're going to get tested, you have to make discerning decisions.
Absolutely. And don't forget, in the biblical story, prior to Jesus basically giving his theology, which is the Beatitudes in Matthew 5, he's just come out of the desert where he was tempted by the devil.
Right.
So, and this is the last point at which the magician has any potential to basically impact on our lives, is at this point here. So that's why there's 3 legs based on this tradition of the tarot. There's only 3 legs on his table, is because up until we're still in the position where we could be tempted to go back to our old ways.
Yes.
Okay, and that's demonstrated by the 2 human figures attached to the anvil. Right. And so it's sort of like, if we're totally relying on our human will, then we're going to find ourselves attached to our old patterns again and going back to that. And that's what the temptation was. Jesus was tempted to have wealth, power, and success, and he said, no, get behind me.
Yeah.
I'm about my Father's work. So that's the process of the dark night of the soul and surrender. We're going through this process where we're surrendering thoughts, desires, and we're surrendering our habits, our way of living as a human being, in order to make ourselves available to being directed and guided. And of course, what the rest of the cards then do is to take us through this journey. And so we end up with, for example, the Tower card is the next card. It's called the House of God card. And this is the point at which we enter into the House of God. What's really interesting in the early Tower cards or House of God cards, the light actually went up, not lightning coming down. In fact, there wasn't lightning in the early ones. It was just fire going up towards the sun. This is sunrise. It's in the east. It's on the right-hand side of the lemniscate. And this is the point, and I want to say this is what happens in this point here. When we enter the house of God, we are so committed to the love of God that we just let go of our attachment to the world of illusion. It's not even a discipline. And the 4th Beatitude says, blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be filled. And basically what happens in this place here is that we have a natural hunger and thirst for what is righteousness? Love in all of its dimensions. And we don't even worry about wealth, power, love. And this is where, once again, Jesus taught this whole concept, seek ye first the kingdom of God, and all of these things, the material things, will be added unto you. That's what grace does. Grace naturally will give you the things that you need in order to function in the world, if you're able to move to this place where you make love your priority. And so in summary, then, the star card is she's pouring water, which is social justice and forgiveness. So that's learning how, as a human being is turning up to love people, feeding the hungry, visiting those in prison, doing good to those, and forgiveness, which is selective remembering. It's about holding people in this awareness of love. It doesn't mean that you are accepting of their behaviour, but you understand their motives. You understand that if somebody's not extending love, it's a call for help.
Right. Yeah.
And so you're able to hold that awareness. And then you've got the moon card. And as I said to you before, the moon card is blessed to the pure in heart, for they shall see God. And that is enlightenment. In that moment there, that is the card of true enlightenment, is when you see the face of God. Mm-hmm. Because the face of God is pure light.
Right.
And that is the enlightenment. And that's from purity of heart. This is the point where you've purified yourself in terms of how you turn up in the world. And in the book, I talk about the card of the moon card shows a pond with a crayfish in it. And the crayfish is Cancer. And Cancer, as an astrological symbol, had a constellation in the middle of it called Priapus. And Priapus means the crib or the manger. And this card literally represents the birth of Christ or Christ consciousness. So this is the divine part of our being now emerging in who we are as a human being. And so the rest of the cards then demonstrate, the sun card, for example, is moving to this place of non-duality, where you break down the barriers of, you recognize that divine essence is who we all are. And in seeing this other person with you, you're recognizing the true essence of this other person as being God. Just as you are. And so all of a sudden there's an embracing. And the wall, it's interesting, paradise is he who stands beside the wall. And literally that's what this card represents, is the point at which these two people now recognize divinity within each other, and they're standing beside the wall. And then finally the death card, and here's the trumpeter, and he's got the test of the cherubim.
That's judgment, isn't it?
This figure, it's judgment. It's the judgment card. And basically that's the judgment. How do you match up in terms of integrating physical, mental, emotional, spiritual consciousness in your being? And if you have a look at the figure, generally the figure coming out of the grave is very androgynous. It's generally half male and half female. And this is somebody who has fully integrated essence and energy. So energy being thoughts and desires, essence being love and beauty, they've been integrated fully into their being, and this is the judgment that then allows them to enter back into the sacred yoni, back into the oneness with the divine, or incarnating and re-engaging the journey once again. So these cards in the Marseille Tarot, and I'm sorry I didn't get to explain those more fully to people, but my book certainly goes into this in quite a bit of detail, and the one-on-one stuff that I do with people in terms of taking people through, particularly this, what I'm calling the map of transcendence. Transcendence meaning transcending our human beingness and reconnecting with our divine essence. There's a process to that. It's not. It doesn't happen by chance. No. And what we're all experiencing right now, what the world is giving us, is an opportunity to let go of the illusion and to really embrace our deep spiritual journey. Yeah. And it's a gift. Yeah. This is a gift.
It is. It's one of those gifts you don't recognize until you're at a place in your life to see it. Unless you have somebody that can show it to you, which is why this conversation is happening and why your program is important. A lot of this is very in line with what I teach in Spirit Gym, and any of the Spirit Gym practitioners listening throughout this conversation will have recognized many of the things that I've taught them. But it's good, it's kind of like... I've got one of my best friends, Amy, who is my partner in Spirit Gym is creating a beautiful program for women to help them heal on many levels and things like that. But another friend of mine who's also a woman, without knowing about Amy's program, came up and developed a program that's almost identical. And so I introduced the two and said, you two need to talk because you're obviously riding on the same light beam here. But I said, don't worry, because there's enough women in the world that need this help right now that if there was 1,000 of you doing the same program, it wouldn't matter because there's that many people that need the help. And each of you will present it in a unique way that will attract the right people to you. So I think we're at a time in the evolution of humanity where we need a lot of people that have knowledge and wisdom and life experience to share. And then I think for each individual, their heart will be drawn toward, when the student is ready, the teacher appears, and they'll have that sense of harmony with who is being brought to them, which may seem like happen chance, but is probably the soul. And if you've listened to this podcast this far, then you're probably listening for a reason. So that was a great journey. And if we had more time, I just don't want to make the podcast so long that it's arduous for people to get through, but they've got the concepts. And I don't think this is the last podcast you and I will do together. I hope not, because there's a lot we can talk about on all of these things. Like I said, we could do a podcast on each archetype very easily.
Just about.
Russell, maybe before we say goodbye, you could just review what programs you have available right now and any offerings there is for the listeners and where people can find those programs and you.
Okay. So you find me at russellsturgess.com.au and the programs in there, I do a whole lot of things, but the mindfulness program that I talked about, you'll see that listed in on the website.
And we'll have it in the show notes.
And I've sent those details through, and they'll be in the show notes. And that's taking people through those first two phases about how to be aware, which is fundamental to the dark night of the soul. The other part of it then is the transcendence, map of transcendence. The map of transcendence, I am doing a 16-session online, which will be available it won't be fully completed by the time we get to when this airs, but people will be able to access that, and it's a fairly inexpensive way to at least go through and get the information. It's me doing some lives over 16 sessions, which will be available for a very nominal fee that people can subscribe to and do that at their own pace. And then there's an opportunity to do one-on-one with me. Look, I'm not giving people any sort of deals simply because I don't charge a lot for
right.
my
You
work
don't.
anyway.
No, it's very, very reasonable.
The
deal is they get a good teacher. And I have students that are in your programs, and they tell me that they absolutely love the way you teach, and they are very aligned with you. And I've had nothing but excellent feedback from my students in your programs.
Well, look, if people, I haven't done much on Google before, and I decided to create a business page on Google, and some people have started to put feedback on there about my work with them. And I would recommend, if anyone wants to see who I am, go and have a look at those, because I've got 5 out of 5
Excellent.
on every single review. Every single review has been 5, and I am just so humbled by the words that people are using. And if you want to hear objective wording about who I am and how I do my work, listen to these people, of which a couple of them are people that came from the last talk that we did. We had a couple of people come and do my program in that, and their lives have completely changed as a result of what we did.
Good. Yeah, well, I'm really grateful. I think this is so important for everybody, really. But only those that are ready for a program like that will come, and that's the best way to have it. You don't want students in a program that are there for the wrong reasons.
Absolutely.
So, any other closing comments, Russell, before we say goodbye and close the podcast?
Look, I think that probably the most important gem that I've given you today is full stops.
Yeah.
Do you know what? The more that we use full stops, the more we can live our life in peace, and the more we invite grace to become part of our reality. I actually have a business card where I say I'm a punctuation expert, and underneath it I have my saying, and it says, "Full stops invite God in, commas push God out."
I'm sure that makes people think, they're probably like, what the hell does that mean?
Yeah. Well, and it's that simple. I mean, here's the whole thing. For as complex as all this seems, it's actually that simple. If we could allow ourselves to really embrace the simplicity of seeing with our eyes, hearing with our ears, and understanding with our heart. Mm-hmm. If I have a last bit to leave with you, that's it. Is live your life where you see with your eyes, hear with your ears, and understand with your heart. And your reality will be a completely different reality to anything that is causing suffering.
Yeah, I think, I'd like to just close with a concept I share in Spirit, Jim, that I think can be helpful for people. And that is, if God is God, then there can't be anything here but God, and we can't be anybody but God embodied. And so I often tell people when I'm working with them as a therapist, like they might need to change their diet, or they might need to, stop drinking so much coffee or doing certain drugs. And I say, look, if you can't do it for yourself, do it for the people that you love. And so when you realize that we're all God workers, we're all vessels of the divine, experiencing and exploring itself and coming to its own realization of what it is and its own expression of its creativity and beauty and love. I think it's a lot easier. Like when I'm having a hard time, if I realize that I'm going through this with God, as God, and for God, then it seems to make it easier to carry the weight of it, and also helps me orient myself toward what are the values that really resonate with the word God. Making more money at the expense of my peace, or at the expense of the ability to love people, doesn't really bring happiness, and it doesn't teach my children how to live. And we have a lot of enculturation by corporations and people that want us to be distracted and busy and miserable and sick and profitable to them. And that's the magician at work. But if we say, what am I doing with God, for God, and as God? And we realize that ultimately God is love, then what am I doing with love, for love, and as love? I find that makes challenging times, painful times easier. In other words, it just takes some of the weight out of the cross of being human, So that's my invitation, is just question yourself. What does the word God really mean to you? And if you realize God means that for which there is no other, then there can't be anything else here but God. And if that lands for you, then know that you're doing God's work of self-realization and healing and growing and becoming. And that's really all God has to do. There's nothing else for God to do.
Just another thought too. Next year, I'm hoping to start doing live-in retreats up here in the Bunya Mountains. The Bunya Mountains is one of the most sacred Aboriginal areas of Australia. Probably Ullaroos, probably one of the key ones. But the Bunya Mountains has for a long time been valued by the Indigenous people for its deep spiritual roots, and so during 2025 I'm going to start doing live-in retreats, and I say, America's a long way away, but during the 80s when I was doing all of my spiritual studies, I used to go to America all the time and do live-in retreats with people when I was learning, because I couldn't do it here in Australia. Right. So once again, look out for that, because some of you might be interested in coming to Australia, and those that are listening in Australia, because I know you have a lot of followers.
We have more followers in Australia than anywhere.
I'm blown away, mate. People keep on using your name, and it's really lovely. And so those Australians that are listening, have a look at my website as a little bit later in the year, and I'll be promoting my first live-in retreat.
Well, there's a lot of people that would love to go to Australia and do love to go to Australia. Yeah, I just got some stats back. My podcast is listened to in 171 countries, but by far the biggest population of listeners is in Australia, which is cool because that's where the Chek Institute really grew. And the Australians and the Kiwis were the people that got it. And the Americans were always so far behind. And I'm sorry, Americans, but you were a bit slow to get the draw. So there's a lot of Americans that will probably be happy to go to Australia to stay ahead of the curve because the Aussies seem to be on the cutting edge of evolution.
Oh, it's interesting. Anyway, so So it's and in fact, two of your devotees, I'm doing a podcast with them in a few weeks.
Do you remember their names?
So, not off the top of my head, but one of the young fellas came and interviewed you.
Jake.
Just recently.
Jake Stone.
Yes.
Oh, yeah, Corrective Culture. Yeah, you'll love those guys. They're badass.
So they're doing a podcast interview with me. On
great. Yeah, fantastic. You're gonna have a great time with them. Well, fantastic. I'm sure lots of other people listening will probably want to do podcasts with you as well. So thank you, Russell. Another great visit. Love hanging out with you. I always love learning how you see the world and how you engage tarot. And it's neat for me because you're giving me a nice lesson in the Marseille tarot. And even though I read your book multiple times, actually, you can never digest it all. So getting to go through this with you helps me take pieces of the book and say, oh, okay, now I can see how he's piecing this together. And I think it's just really valuable. I learn better through repetition and re-exposure. But when you're talking to the guy that wrote the book, you can actually get context and put pieces together. So I'll say thank you once again. And all of you listening, Russell's here because I know his teachings are very good. And I'm endorsing him by having him here by saying, look, this is one of the guys that I would spend time and energy and money to go see if my life was such that I was in a point where I wanted to travel around the world. But fortunately for me, I'm an old enough guy that I have an inner teacher and I can get Russell on a podcast and cheat.
It's lovely. Yeah, not a problem at all. No, just delightful. Thank you for the opportunity.
My last thing is, Russell, if I remember right, you agreed you're happy to do a 1-hour Q&A session.
Yep.
So, because I want to share this with the whole public. I think everybody needs to hear this. And so for the members, you will have access to Russell for a 1-hour Q&A session where you can talk to him directly with your questions. And I think you'll really have a great time with that. And I want to close by saying thank you to my sponsors for your love, your support, your amazing products, and remind you that anything that you buy from the sponsors goes to the hands of regenerative farmers, organic farmers, biodynamic farmers, and the people that are caring for the planet. So you're not only supporting ethical companies, but you're supporting the people that are supporting the planet and you. So it's a win-win situation. And the sponsors share some of the proceeds with the podcast so that I can afford to take the time and put the energy and the cost into making the podcasts so that you get great education and information. So thank you to the podcast sponsors. Thank you to all of you for anything you buy from the sponsors that supports the podcast, supports you, and supports the planet. And I'm looking forward to our next podcast. I'm not sure what it'll be, but I'm always looking for people like Russell that have some deep wisdom to share. So thank you again, Russell, and thanks to all of you for joining Russell and I today. Lots of love.
Cheers. Thanks, mate. Been lovely.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to Spirit Gym with Paul Chek and today's guest, Russell Sturgess. Don't forget to download the graphic that accompanies this episode from the show notes page at paulchek.com/podcast. You can find out more about Russell's work and book a 15-minute appointment to find out about working one-on-one with him at russellsturgess.com.au. That's russellsturgess.com.au. His books, The Spiritual Roots of the Tarot and Get Out of Jail card can be found on Amazon.com using links on the show notes page or on Russell's website. Russell's programs are also available on his website, including the Cathar Code, a map for the ending of suffering, and his Pathways to Mindfulness mentoring program. Go to russellsturgess.com.au for more information and to register. Check the show notes page at paulchek.com/podcast for details on the special offers from our premier sponsors, Bioptimizers, Paleo Valley, Wild Pastures, and Organifi, as well as links to Paul's social media, his YouTube channels, and his blog. We invite you to become a member of Paul Chek's Spirit Gym podcast. With your membership, you get access to exclusive extended episodes of Spirit Gym with Paul Chek, members-only Q&A opportunities with Paul and his guests, access to the podcast members forum within the Spirit Gym community where you can interact with other passionate listeners, and the chance to purchase exclusive Spirit Gym merchandise. You can subscribe today by going to paulchek.com/podcast. And finally, if you enjoyed today's episode, please consider leaving us a 5-star rating and a warm review on the podcast platform of your choice. This podcast is available on Apple Podcast, Spotify, Amazon Music, Audible, and YouTube.